Welcome to Powerful Impact. We have Morgan and Nev, and today we have special guest Navjot Dhaliwal. How are you? Life
I'm
coach
so good.
extraordinaire,
I'm
businesswoman. I mean, her exploits are just from one end of the spectrum to the other. We have a great show ahead of us. Um, First of all, I just want people to know where you're originally from, and then we can move through how you ended up where you're at now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. So, I'm originally from California. I was born and raised in Huntington Beach. My family's from India, so from the Punjab region, the north of India. So, that's where my roots are from. And then now I actually live in Tulum, Mexico. So, I'm out here. I've been here for a couple years.
Dope. So, growing up in California, how did that help you navigate your way to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? So, growing up in California, I know it sounds amazing. I mean, it really was. I love California. It's very laid back, it's very chill. But California has a side to it, right? Like where it is very still superficial. I grew up in Orange County, so really close to LA, kind of has that vibe, that Beverly Hills kind of a vibe, right? So growing up, actually, I struggled. I got bullied a lot just
Hmm.
because of my name, because of being Indian, because I was different.
Hmm.
So growing up, I guess what I'm doing now, which, we'll get into in a little bit, how it's kind of all unfolded was me to like break a lot of the programming that I grew up with, right? Because
Hmm.
Orange County, Southern California, way different than the Bay Area. There's just so much more of an impact or an emphasis, right, on looks, you know what I mean, on outward appearance and all that. So I feel like I had to break a lot of those molds within myself to find my own inner security. So that's kind of been a journey, and it is quite tied into what I do now. So I help people build confidence from within, and I grew up, somewhere where it was always about the outward look, right? So yeah, it was very interesting how that tied together.
Right. So go right into that. What is it exactly that you do?
Yes, so I am a spiritual life coach, and I focus particularly on subconscious reprogramming. So I recently coined myself as a subconscious reprogramming coach.
So, we've gotten to know you through Instagram,
Hmm.
and your moniker is Metaphysical Goddess. How did you come up with that name, and does it have special meaning to you?
Yes, it actually has a very special meaning to me. So when I was in school, I went to UC Irvine, and my degree was actually in psychology and social
Mhm.
behavior. And I could have graduated early, but they asked me if I wanted to add a minor. So I added a minor in philosophy. And one of the first philosophy classes I took was metaphysics, right? And so that was really where, the name came later, a few years after I graduated, but that class really blew my mind because it was all about how can you prove that the physical reality is real, and those were what my classes would be. And as philosophy classes, I don't know if you guys have taken them, but there's really no right or wrong answers in any of our papers or any of our tests, right? It's always just like, can you prove whatever you are saying? So it was just very interesting, very open ended. It had a huge impact on my life, being able to have the psychology, but then also the philosophy, which is all about shifting perspectives, And so the metaphysics class really helped me with that. So a few years later, right before I launched my business, I decided to start sharing content around metaphysics, quantum physics, manifestation, all that. So Metaphysical Goddess just kind of stuck. And
Mhm.
that's how I came up with it because metaphysics was my favorite class.
So at what point did you decide that being a life coach is what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So in 2016, I got my yoga teacher training done. So it was in Costa Rica, and I was out there for like a month. And at the end of the training, they basically asked us, what do you want to do with yoga, right? On like a higher level when you go back to the States and get back into the real world. And a lot of people were there just to do the yoga teacher training, honestly, just for themselves, not really to teach, but to have the experience of getting your certification and all that. And for me, I really wanted to take it to the next level. So I remember writing down, I want to be a coach, I want to host retreats, and I want to be able to take this knowledge and be able to share it on that type of a level, right? Where I'd be taking people through a journey really with my
Mm-hmm.
program. So that was when I decided, but I didn't launch my business until 3 years later.
So for people like me whose only experience of life coaching is the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, what
Are there life coaches on that show?
Teddy Mellencamp was a life coach.
Were they certified SP? Were they official,
Yes,
or they
she was
just
a
were
certified.
self-titled?
No, she was a certified John Cougar Mellencamp's daughter. She was a certified life coach. Yes,
Okay.
but
About Jack and Diane doing the
but
best that they can.
just uh real just in reality, because I know that is
Reality
kind of
television, but not real
kind of
life.
just a short for TV, not the focus of the show. But what
Right.
exactly does a life coach do?
Yeah, so life coaches, there's so many different ones, right? And basically the way that I look at it and the way I'd explain it in simple terms is it's basically a mentor, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you're really hiring somebody based on their experience and their wisdom, not just the knowledge, right? So and on top of that, there's so many different types of coaches. Like I have a friend who's a coach for literal so specific, such a specific niche, right? She's a coach for entrepreneurs with ADHD. So she creates programs to help entrepreneurs with ADHD who lack the focus to start a business, but they have amazing ideas, right? So really
Mm-hmm.
grounding in that aspect, right? So there's this aspect around coaching that has accountability, right? That I feel like not all coaches can be compared to therapists because not all coaches are helping people with their mental health, right? Like I said, there's business coaches, there's people who literally be like, what have you been sleeping on, or like saying you've been wanting to do, right, forever, but you haven't started it. Let's go ahead and have you invest in that, and I'll hold you accountable, and we'll take it week by week, right? So that's very similar to what I do, in a sense where the structure, I start everybody off at 8 weeks. And then I also have a year-long program. And you really have to kind of qualify for that year-long program depending on how you do in the 8 weeks. But you're basically hiring somebody based on their wisdom, experience. As we can see, the world right now is moving more towards self-education, right? I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the typical model of school and that system is not that it's like dying out completely, but I do feel like now with all these resources, it's like I would rather hire somebody who's already been through that, right? And they've came out on the other side, right? And then hire them as my mentor or my coach to see how they did it and how it and it'll most likely work for you too, right? I'm not saying it always does, but most of my clients get really amazing results. And yeah, so for example, right, life coaches, we're allowed to share our stories, right? So you don't
Mm-hmm.
really see therapists getting into their stories often with their clients, right? As far as what they've been through and what they rewired and what they healed from. So with a coach, you're really hiring somebody based on like what have they been through, right? So I was in an abusive relationship for 5 years physically. So a lot of the women that come to me can either relate to that or they can relate to a story very similar to that. Manipulation, being in, toxic relationships, things like that. And I can empathize with them because I've been there exactly where they're at, and then from there I coach them and guide them almost, because the inner guide is within themselves, but it's just about holding space for them. So does that make a little bit of sense? So it's a little bit more based on wisdom and experience, and it's an investment on your own, right? Because with a coach, it's a two-way thing. It's like, I'm showing up for you and you show up for you too. And so it's all results oriented, I would say, more results oriented than therapy or taking a class at a university. That's basically all on you. I mean, the teacher's showing up for you as well, but this is more of like a one-on-one type of a mentorship. So it's very personalized.
I get that, because we can't even get our therapist to show his face.
Where are you at, therapist?
You gotta go. Woo! Shots fired. Shots fired. But it's true. From this clinical perspective, you don't want like a therapist that overshares or takes up too much of your time, because you only have 45 minutes to an hour. So I like that.
Right.
And it seems to me that life coaches deal with the here and now and more moving forward than really delving deep into your past, so to speak. Not saying they don't, but not as much focus and emphasis on that. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me. But that's my assumption.
No, actually, you hit it right on the nail right there. Exactly. So we'll go into talk therapy, right? With my clients, I'll go into that. I'll go, all right, let's get into your subconscious. This is why you are the way you are. What are your patterns in life, relationships, or career wise? Those are usually the two categories that I help a lot of people with. What are your patterns, right? And so we'll get into that, why you are the way you are. But our main focus is exactly what you said, the present. And I give you tools and I hold you accountable to those tools, and then making that shift so that your future looks different, And so it's a little bit, it's like an add-on to going into why you are the way you are. So, and holding space for that too, right? I think it's important to really get into that as well. But yes, it's exactly what you said. It's very present moment focused and future steps.
So I think that's interesting, because I know I'm stuck on this, but Teddy was a weight loss life coach mostly. She did.
Okay.
She did. A lot of people lost a lot of weight through her, and there was a level of accountability. But what type of training or experience does someone need to be a life coach?
Yeah. So honestly, it depends, it depends on like what you have under your belt. So that's another thing about coaching is like when you hire a coach, you're going to want to ask them like what certifications, what knowledge do they have, right? Because sometimes it's not so much about being certified, it's more so what tools are you going to be using, right, to help people out. And so for instance, with me, it's my psych degree with the philosophy, but then as well with my studying my own self-study, right, with the quantum physics stuff and the books that I recommend and the books that I use, but then also my yoga training, my Eastern philosophy knowledge through that, and then I have Reiki as well, so I work a lot with the energy body. So it's a really good question that you ask, because each coach is going to have a different toolkit, right, of what they use. So with what was her name on the show? Terry. Sorry, I don't watch the Real Housewives.
Teddy.
Teddy. Yeah, so Teddy might have her own certifications, or she might just have the results and people will be like, how'd you get those results, right? And so it's a little bit there, and that's the part of it where it's like really an investment, because you're trusting that coach, right, on a different level than the old world model, where it was more so of like, what do you have on paper, right? And so I think it just kind of depends, right? Like an acting coach, right? Like how much of a level do you want that coach to have for you to be able to hire them and trust them that they could get you even 5%, 10% further in your journey being an actress or an actor, right? And for my coaching, it's about emotional well-being and spiritual well-being. And so it's kind of like what have you been through? I would say it's like more about the story with the life coach than anything. It's getting to know your coach, getting to know their story, seeing if you vibe with them. Like that matters a lot. Like I wouldn't even make an offer to somebody after I get on a consultation with them if we're not connecting right on that level.
Mhm.
So I think it's just a lot more to do with the person rather than the certifications. But I think it is very important to have things under your belt because this is the other dark part of the industry is that everybody now is starting to say they're a coach and, and without any sort of certification or anything. And I think that that's kind of, you know, that's kind of that other end of the spectrum that I'm
And
kind
it
of
can be
seeing nowadays.
harmful. It can be harmful
Super
to people in
harmful.
the profession.
Right. So how do
Super harmful.
sorry. So how do people go about?
I,
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to ask this because it just seemed like more of in order in the process seemed more like both people were on an interview um
Mm-hmm.
when she would take clients. So is it kind of like that?
Or a screening
You
process.
don't take a client that you don't feel is a good fit, or they don't you'll drop one who doesn't do the work.
Right, exactly. So on my consultations, I have very specific questions. And exactly, I feel like it would be a disservice if I were to offer someone my services if I don't feel like I can help them. Sometimes people come to me and, they'll be on a consultation with me. I'll try to provide them with as much as I can in that consult. But sometimes I'll tell them that I recommend them to go to therapy, because I'm like, where the level of where they're at, right? Not that there's like levels, right? Like above or low. It's just more so like where they're at. I would feel like, hey, I think you still need to dive into all these things and kind of share and get a lot of things off your chest before you can start having the accountability and like switching your patterns up and like all that stuff, right? And so
Mhm.
yeah, so I definitely feel like it's more of an interview process to be able to work with a coach.
I'm
So
sorry, Morgan.
no, you're okay. I was going to ask. So on the other side of that, what kind of questions do you think people should be asking someone they're looking to hire a life coach, as to not necessarily make sure they're a good fit, but just to make sure that they're also going to be like, because we talk about people, everyone's saying their life coach without having proper certification. Like, what are some of those questions for both that either they're going to be a good fit or that they're actually someone who's saying they're who they say they are.
That's a great question, Morgan. So first off, I would ask them, why are you a mentor? Why are you a coach? Right. And if that answer is anything that's not from the heart, right, and just feel into it, right? Because you got to really like feel like your coach cares about you, like they care about your growth and your results. You know what I mean? So I would definitely, because most of these things, people have been wanting to work on them for a while, but they haven't gotten results. So, like, someone that can really, really share that their heart is fully in it, that they're going to be fully in your corner. Another question would be, how many clients do you currently have? Right? Because a coach, you got to also understand, like, same thing as a therapist or a doctor, like, you can't be taking on more than you can chew, because then you can't serve properly, you know what I mean? And like really be in that person's corner. And so I always recommend that people ask that. So how many clients do you serve? And I would say, like, really get to know that person's story and exactly ask them if they have certifications, ask them if they have anything to back up their knowledge, right? And then also ask them their story. So see where they were at and have them get vulnerable, right? Have them get vulnerable on their end, right? Because that's what's going to make you feel safe, right? And trust this person is like, hey, this is what I've been through and this is how I got out of it, and now this is why I help women or men or whatever it is, whoever it may be, right? With these certain things. So I think that those three questions are really important. So, like, get to know their story, ask them how many clients do they have currently? Do they feel like they have the energy to hold space for me. And I would definitely ask them, why are they a coach, and see if you resonate with that answer.
There's something that's similar to that when it comes to like therapy, right? Because something that I learned when I was in school, getting my clinical certification, they said that you can only take clients as far as you're willing to go or as far as you've been. And that meant with PTSD, depression, anxiety, cultural competence, any area that you were not willing to do the work or do the certification or actually live through, you'd be limited with your clients, and your clients would be able to pick it up. And you would notice that you have like this imaginary, I guess, glass ceiling constantly and buck your head with them. And they said until you break through certain glasses and barriers, you will not be a good therapist. And that's what I keep hearing from you in this thread. Is that accurate? You can
That's
only take me
super
as far as
accurate.
you can.
Super
Okay.
accurate. Yeah. And especially with therapists or like even doctors or like anyone, it's like really important to ask why they're doing it, because some people just do professions for the money, right? Some people just do professions because they feel like, oh, this is what my mom told me to do because, I'm Indian. So, I was only told doctor, lawyer, engineer by the time I was 5. So, I had to really break those molds even because I feel like beyond just being Indian, I feel like a lot of people just end up choosing professions because they just want the pay or the status or whatever it is. And so I think you're completely right. And from a therapist perspective, I think it's important. And also with nowadays, being informed, like trauma informed, how do certain people of different backgrounds have trauma and how can you hold space for them? You know what I mean? Because it's like certain therapists probably wouldn't understand that perspective. Like I said, coming from a strict Indian household, and so it's quite interesting on that perspective too. And being a coach, it's so interesting because I tend to attract a lot of people that look just like me or, people of color in general. So I think that that's really interesting as well to get into. To
So
like
what?
like at kind of going back to your question, Morgan, of like what to ask them, like I would like really see if they understand your pain, right? Or like your perspective, especially since coaching is very personal, and
Mhm.
so it'd be really like, can you see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about what I've been through, so I think that's really important as well.
Nice. So what are some of your specialties and the populations you work with currently as a life coach? The age,
Yeah,
gender, race,
so
ethnicities.
yeah, so I love working with, like I said, subconscious reprogramming. So I'll get a little bit deeper into that. But basically, I tend to, like I said, it's not by I don't promote myself to only people of color, but I've been, a lot of women come to me and a lot of people of color because I think that they just feel like comfortable in a way, to have somebody that looks like them. At least that's what I've been told. But I serve everybody, anybody that wants to do this work. So and that, like I said, that I resonate with. But as far as subconscious reprogramming, that became my specialty because in the beginning I was coaching people on very basic spirituality, being able to understand that your thoughts create your reality, and the energetic world and how everybody is you pushed out and things like that. And now, getting deeper into the subconscious, which is kind of the darker part of ourselves, and the ego, right, which is our identity. So a lot of people, they work with the thoughts, they work with the emotions, which I do that. But I also now am tapping into the ego, which is where the subconscious has created an identity around, right, these programs. So for instance, let's talk about people of color, right? So sometimes I'll have clients and their pattern that they see themselves looping in is with money, and they constantly have this belief. So I first thing I do is I talk to them about their limiting beliefs, right? So what
Scarcity
belief
mindset.
Right. So what beliefs
Scarcity
exactly?
mindset.
What beliefs do you have? Exactly. Scarcity mindset, lack mindset. What beliefs do you have that are not in alignment with what you want? So let's say you want a really nice job with high pay and you want to do what you love. Let's say you really want a really nice house or whatever it may be. With subconscious reprogramming, because a lot of people will say they want those things, but for some reason their loops and patterns always tend to block, right? They have these blocks between these things, and that's from an energetic level, right? And so we go within the mind, me and my clients, and we're like, what narratives, what stories, right? Because the mind's like a computer. So my specialty is to like go into that computer and see what programs have you been taking on subconsciously, right? So the first programs that we're pretty much given are our parents, and their programming, right? Because when we're kids, we're sponges, and they're kind of like our first, experience of like, I listening and absorbing, right? And so from there, it's also in school how we're treated, and all on and all those things, right? And it also depends on where you grew up, and where you grew up, what was it like around, around you, your environment. But going back to the parent thing, right? Like I grew up with immigrant parents. A lot of my clients grew up with immigrant parents, right? So they came from nothing and then, built their life. So a lot of the programming was like, oh, we don't have enough, right? So then it's like that aspect of like, oh, I'm making money and I have all this money, but I don't know how to like spend it, or you just struggle with making money in general, right? Because you have these programs that say like, I don't deserve it for some reason, right? And so a lot of these programs too are ancestral or even created in the womb. So how your mom was feeling when you were in her womb, and if she was stressed or if she had a lot of narratives that weren't super favorable, right? Like we don't realize that we take all those in, and I think when we become adults is when we realize it the most. So that's kind of what I dive into. The first thing, as far as my specialty goes, is where are your narratives at, and do they align with the life that you want? So if you want to live a life where you love what you do and you get paid to do what you love, what programs in there block that? Because your mind might be telling you subconsciously, I need to only do this type of a job, and I can only do this type of a job. Imposter syndrome will kick in, right? And be like, oh, there's no way I could do that, even though that's what your heart wants. So we go into why do you believe that you can't do that, right? And on a global scale, a lot of Black and brown people, is from what I've noticed, do have this program kind of built in of I can't have what I want, or I can't achieve that. Whereas, from a young age, we're kind of taught to limit ourselves a lot more, is what I've noticed, just within my clients and within myself also.
So it is cultural,
Yeah.
environmental, I guess nature versus nurture. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
layers. So what is it, like deprogramming or reprogramming, neuroplasticity? Is like this?
Yep, all of that reprogramming, epigenetics, is very fairly new, and it's a study to really see how mental health, right, is also passed down by genetics, by new generations. So
Huh.
depression, anxiety, bipolar, right, PTSD. So sometimes you'll
And
see
addictive
kids
personality.
and you don't know why they're so scared of life, right? But there's things in there, right, that they might not even know.
You already you brought up ancestral, like just uh, sort of
Mhm.
ancestral trauma already. What exactly is that? Could you go deeper into that?
Yeah, I'll definitely go deeper into that. So, since the mind's like a computer, right? And I mentioned epigenetics, so like the study that mental health and trauma is actually passed down in our DNA as well. It's up to us, as the spawn of our ancestors, to be able to live this life and see if we can break even just one of those traumas or programs. So for instance, where my culture, right, there's arranged marriage, right? So like they'll marry off the daughters, right? Right. So let's say I had a grandma or great great grandma that got married off to somebody that she was actually very traumatic, that relationship, right? But then she had to look at it. Her program was, I have to stay in this relationship. I have to stay in this marriage because it's my duty as a wife, right? I have to say yes. I'm not allowed to say no, right? So it really impacts your throat chakra there, your communication, and blocks it, right? So don't speak too much. You're a woman, we're marrying you off because this person, you know, their family is going to take care of you financially. You're going to have stability. Because back then, you know, my grandma's age, like women weren't even allowed to go to college, right? So you're getting married to somebody because your survival is based on that, right? So how can you have choice when it's your survival, right? And that was the program they were sold. So here I am, you know, born in 1991. Let's say I come into this life, and for some reason, I also feel this blockage here in my throat, even if my parents aren't like that. Or maybe they're a little bit like that, but not to the extent of my great great grandmother, right? And so, you know, because my mom worked and stuff her whole life, and she was able to, you know, be a nurse and everything. But let's just say that I subconsciously felt like I couldn't speak my truth. So let's say, you know, if my parents or something wanted me to go do something that I don't want to do, right? I'm not going to be able to speak up. So that's kind of the ancestral trauma, right? And so we have to create that safety within our communication and unlearn those things, you know, and we might not even know where they stem from originally, right? So that's kind of what I mean by ancestral trauma, or like Neville mentioned, scarcity mindset. So if your family didn't really come from money, this is why I love rags to riches stories, because that's way more impressive to me than somebody that had a lot of money or had a trust fund and they went and started $1 billion company, right? To me, it's way more interesting from somebody to grow up in the hood or grow up in somewhere that's lower socioeconomic and then be able to switch the mindset and the programming of that and like know that you will amount to more than that, right? So that's also ancestral trauma, because that is not just from your parents' generation. Your parents learned that from somewhere, right? And I think that's where we need to realize too, is if parental, you know, like I mentioned earlier, is the first type of programming that we receive, we have to remember they received their programs from somebody else as well, and vice versa. It goes all the way up the family tree until the generation that breaks the trauma. So that's kind of what ancestral healing is.
What is I got kind of a two-part question here, but like, what are some of the tools that you give people to help break some of that stuff, and then how, and that probably bleeds into this, and how we can deepen our relationship with ourselves.
Yes, that's such a good question. So this is where I love this part. So basically, you know, like I said, the first few weeks of when I work with people, it's really diving into why, right? It's really diving into the subconscious. Like, why do you believe that? You know, do you actually believe that? If you had a choice to believe that you're abundant and that you are capable and all this, would you believe that? And most people are like, yeah, I would totally believe that, right? And if people still have to work on their self-love, you know, depending on where they're at, maybe they don't know if they would actually believe that, right? But I try to get my clients, I ask a lot of questions so that they will answer it themselves, to know that, hey, this isn't my chosen beliefs. And that's really where I start at, because the tools come after we take full responsibility for our reality, you know, and that's kind of how we move out of victim mode into this conscious creator, because that's kind of what I teach people how to do. And victim mode, I think victim gets a really bad rap. I truly believe that everybody has to go through the stage of being a victim, right? Like for me, I was a victim of domestic violence, right? So I was a victim of being in a physically abusive relationship, right? That happened to me. I was victimized. And for a while, I really did stay in that victim mode. So I was blaming myself. I was blaming, you know, I was just blaming. I was just hating myself because that happened to me. Then you move into conscious creator. So I have people really, really share their stories and then say, okay, so now are you going to keep taking on those programs from whatever happened to you, or are you going to choose different? And so that's really where the tools come in, because it's really, we're creatures of habit, right? So what beliefs got me into that situation, right, is the first thing I'll ask people. So what beliefs got you into that situation, right, where money seems to always just come and go, like in a negative way for you, right? Or you keep, you know, accepting toxic men or women, right? So what are the thoughts that you have that's making you stay in these cycles? And usually that's the first tool. I'll have them journal. So journaling is huge to build a relationship with yourself. So every week, I actually give a journaling prompt to all my clients for their soul work. So I give them not homework, but soul work every week. So I give them a journaling prompt based on what we talked about, and I'll have them claim it themselves. You know, all right, let's see what kind of beliefs caused that? Okay, I'm not worthy of anything better is usually a really big one that we have to rewire. This is the best that I'll get, right? When it comes to toxic relationships or even staying in a job that you don't like, right? This is the best that I'll get. I'm stuck here, right? I need to stay here, right? For some reason that's a belief that keeps looping in your subconscious. That's why you say you want to go, but you don't, right? For this is the only way, so I'll have them write out basically all their beliefs. And then, then we start rewiring. So the first step really is to start saying the opposite. So then I'll have them write out the opposite of everything that they just wrote down for let's just say this is like the second week of my program, right? Or the third week, depending on how much we're getting into with your subconscious. So then, that's the next step of the process. Start writing the opposite, right? And then this part's a little tricky. So because we're creatures of habit, that first narrative of I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy of this and I'm stuck, there's no way I could do that. Even though I want that, it'll never happen for me. Oh, things seem to be easier for that type of a person, not for me, comparison, right? So we get into all these little inner demons that we have, right? And we write the opposite, but the mind's going to fight that, right? I wish it was that easy that we could just write the opposite and the computer will just take in the codes and now you're a completely different person, right? Essentially, that's what you would like to happen, but it takes a little bit of time. And this is really where the healing comes in. So our thoughts create our reality, right? Our beliefs, our perception is creating our reality, right? Same reason why there could be two people that see the same exact accident and both people are going to see a different thing, right? And describe it differently as well. And so it's the same thing. So it's like based on trauma too. So this is where the healing part comes in, right? So I'll have them write the opposite and then I'll see and I'll go in and say, all right, so now that you wrote the opposite, I am worthy. Of course I can have this. I'm capable, right? Like this is going to be so easy. I have full permission to quit or leave this relationship and something better is going to come my way, right? I have full permission to quit this job, right? So starting to feed yourself the narratives in order for you to get the things that you want, right? Which is going to be on the other side of it. Now the fear starts coming in, right? Because there's fear to think that you can do it. Two, your ego, your identity has already built an identity around, right? As you can see, these are all I am statements, right? So I'm not capable. I'm not worthy. There's no way that I could do that. I'm not capable, right? I have to stay here. All those I statements are the ego, right? So you've already built an identity around that first story, that first narrative, the shitty one, right? The unfavorable one. And this is why I always tell people, I'm not telling people to think positive because this has nothing to do with positive or negative. This has to do with what your brain has taken as truth for you, right? So we're just switching the truths in your brain. So I know I kind of got off on a little tangent there, but you got to switch that narrative first off. That's the tool, right? But your mind's going to fight that new narrative because it's not going to believe it, first of all. And that's normal, right? And so that's when a lot of people quit, because they're looking at law of attraction and all these things. And they're like, oh yeah, let me affirm these things. But no. I don't even go with the affirmations. I say these are the assumptions because your assumptions are the thing that's creating your reality. And it's your natural assumptions. So how do we create something new in our subconscious? We have to look into how did those first narratives, the unfavorable ones, how did they get created? By repetitive thoughts, right? Subconscious. So your dad told you, no, you can't do that. Boom, you took that personally. You allowed it to define you. You created an identity around that. Okay, because my dad told me that, therefore I am not capable. That code goes in your mind, right? Then your mind, right? Because the mechanism of the brain is always looking, it's a reasoning mechanism, right? So it's going to always try to find reasons to prove what we're telling it. So then let's say your teacher, right, ends up coming into your reality and telling you the same thing that your dad told you. It's going to feel like a familiar narrative, right? So your mind's not going to fight it. Your mind's going to take that in, that I'm not good enough, right? When in all reality, this is just people outside of you telling you who you are. It's not you deciding. So when you're consciously now creating a reality, you have to repeat the new narrative, right? And our subconscious is the most open right before we go to sleep and right when we wake up. So I'll tell my clients, hey, it's going to be normal that your ego and your mind is going to fight this new narrative. But I need you to start, as we're healing through this process, right? Of why you don't believe you're good enough and worthy in the first place, right? We're gonna go through why your mind's fighting that so much, because that's the emotional healing part of it. But I'm gonna have you say this new story to yourself every morning and every night. And that's usually what starts to create the infusion, because it's repetitive thought, just like how the first unfavorable narrative got programmed subconsciously. Now you're consciously repeating the new narrative, right? And the way I look at it too, before we kind of, I'll like pause for a second because it's a lot of information, but the way I look at it is that there's two garages in our brain. So we have the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And if we're consciously creating our reality, AKA consciously now choosing who we are, we have to pause, stop trying to do all these things outwardly, right? Because none of that stuff's going to stick unless if you change your identity. So you're going to have your new narrative, right? Writing the opposite. And I recommend writing in stories. So I don't really do boom like affirmations. It's like, I'm capable. Okay, tell me why. Because, and then give yourself a lot of reasons why, because the mind runs on that reasoning brain, right? So I want you to write paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. I have them journal like a whole story of who they are, changing their whole story, revision, even changing their past, right? So normally, oh, I had an abusive father, I had this, I had that, and I had that. What is that reminding the brain of? It's reminding the brain of I'm not worthy, right? So not changing exactly what happened to you, but changing the story of who you are and how your father being abusive or whoever it was, that's their story. That's not your definition of who you are, right? And so they're writing out this story in the conscious mind. I'm asking them to repeat it every morning and every night, and anytime that old story comes in throughout the day. And with repetition from this conscious mind garage, there's a little portal that'll start to get into the subconscious mind eventually. And then you'll start to see your reality mirror your new thoughts, right? And you want to naturally be able to do this. So it's going to be kind of a conscious reprogramming, but then once it's in the subconscious, you're just going to kind of wake up one day and just kind of naturally start to feel like you're more capable, more worthy, and whatever it is. Because your mind's going to now start to find reasons to prove that statement once it hits the subconscious.
So how do you get past the beginning, the beginning stage?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
because changing your mindset state is it sounds
It's a battlefield.
it sounds easy in theory, but in
Right.
reality it's ongoing war. So how do you get people to get to a point where they can even accept the narrative, the new narrative that they're writing?
Yeah, the new narrative, right? That they're so loved, that they're so worthy, that they've always been worthy, all of that. So that's really when we get into the emotions part. So there's three factors, right, of our reality, like how we're creating our reality. It's our thoughts, then it goes to the feelings, right, and emotions, and then it's our actions and behaviors, right? And it's all very subconscious, right? So sometimes I'll even, I'll have people start their narrative work, right? Right, because we're starting at the thought level, because thoughts is what created those feelings and those behaviors, actions or non-actions, right? That you do on a daily basis, right? And so we'll get into the thought realm with the narrative, right? And align that. Then the emotional healing starts. So, like I said, your logical mind's gonna fight it, because you're totally right. It's not a logical process, because we're human. We're so multidimensional. We have emotions, right? And we have triggers, and so that's the next part of the journey and the process. And it's very beautiful, because this is the part where we let ourselves feel We let ourselves feel, right? And so that old narrative most likely has been going on in your subconscious, and you haven't been letting yourself really feel, right? Most people, they're just walking throughout life, almost like zombies, especially in the States, right? Because we're just taught, all right, just go to work, go to this, go to that. So once people start to even be aware of their old narrative and the reason why it hurts to say the new narrative, to even say that I'm beautiful, right? Sometimes I have to help people rewire their physical narratives, right, about how they look, right? And so it hurts. It hurts to say the new narrative, right? And that's when on my calls, this is why it's an 8-week program and prolonged into a year-long program, because during our calls, we really go into why it hurts. We really go into why it hurts. And that's a huge part of the process. Because if that's not addressed, if the emotions aren't addressed, we really can't, those new codes, they it's almost like the brain is a mechanism where we need to replace these codes, right? But in order to replace them, we got to release the heavy energy attached, right? Because we're so attached to our suffering. We're so attached to the darker part of our mind. We're so attached to the old programs because they feel really real, right? The new program is going to feel really fake, And so really that's when I get to do a lot of my deeper, heavy shadow work, right? And so that's getting into the emotions, right? So I'll probably talk to them. All right, so why does I am worthy hurt for you? And then they'll start to share. Then they start to release. And then from there, I provide some emotional healing tools like tapping, like yoga, getting into your body, because we do hold emotions in our body physically, right? Like when we're feeling like our shoulders are really, really tight, that means you're taking on other people's problems, right? So there's a lot of patterns and loops and behaviors then, not just emotions, behaviors then. Let's get into the behavior realm that they need to change, right? So I'll tell them, all right, this week I want you to start practicing saying yes when you really mean yes, and no without guilt. So we'll get into guilt, we'll get into shame, we'll get into why do you feel bad for saying no to your friend or your sister or your dad, like how to set boundaries, right? So these behaviors end up actually allowing that new narrative to become more infused in the brain. So it's exactly what you said. It's not a logical process, even though it is a CPU, like a computer, right? I would love for it to be an input output system where like I could just input the new code and then my reality will just start to show that, which in some cases, if there's no really hard opposing narratives, this is why I have people practice with things that they don't have emotional attachment to. So I'll have them start to say a fun narrative like, oh, in my reality, people always buy me coffee, and that'll be their narrative for the week. And long behold, somebody in their reality will buy them coffee because that's their new belief, and their belief has to be projected into their reality. So I'll have people play around with their power here, with their thoughts. So to pick something very, very random. In my reality, I see purple, I see pink flamingos. I see pink flamingos very often. So that's what their belief is for the week that I've given them. And for somehow they'll see a pink flamingo either on a sticker or they'll see it in an advertisement or they'll see it somewhere, right? And so, randomly on a bumper sticker, and this stuff's real. This stuff is real. And so that's how I have them test it, because the things that have more opposing narratives to them, AKA the things that you've subconsciously accepted about yourself a lot, you know what I mean? Based on your reality, based on every rejection you've ever gotten, the narrative that you told yourself after you got rejected. If your self-concept and your identity went super low after being rejected for an interview, for a date, for whatever it may be, you know what I mean? Then you have a lot of opposing story. So how do we get rid of opposing story? The emotional healing. So I have them feel, I have them really let it out. I have them let it out so that way it's almost like there's more room in their subconscious for the new narrative to start to seep in, because they've most likely not even had somebody hold that space for them before. So that's the process of the fact that it's not logical and it's not linear, and the emotions do have to start to be addressed, right? And this is why we're not doing toxic positivity. We're not doing just slap a, they call it spiritual bypassing, right? When you're just like bypassing because quantum physics and all these things, right? It can only take you so far if you're not doing the deeper shadow work and addressing those emotions or inner demons, as I like to call them. So jealousy, guilt, shame, all those types of things.
Yeah, that kind of reminded me of when you talked about, you told them to see if to write down your reality is a pink flamingo, and then somewhere they see a pink flamingo. It's kind of like when you get a new car and then you see all of the cars that are just like yours after you've never seen your car before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's because you don't have, unless that person has trauma around pink flamingos, there's not a lot of opposing stories there. So they will start to play with their power of their mind. And so I'll have them do that. So then they start to develop a deep trust in this work, right? Because you have to really trust it. Because, like I said, your mind's going to fight that new narrative towards the heavier beliefs that you need to change, right? So, for instance, this is a really good example. So, I have clients come to me for relationship healing. And let's say their pattern, I'll say, okay, what's your pattern? I always get cheated on. Okay, so then that's your belief. That's why that keeps happening, right? And so, yes, of course, right, that person, your partner, is doing it, right? But there's a reason behind that. It's your reality, right? At the end of the day. So there's a reason why you're accepting that. There's a reason why you're with that. There's a reason why, because you low key, maybe high key, believe that that's just what happens to you, right? So now they need to start changing. I only attract faithful people, right? I'm worthy of somebody choosing me and sticking to me, right? And I don't have to bend over backwards to get someone to love me. Those beliefs are a little bit harder, right? So that's why we have to go into the emotional stuff, because I had a client who believes that she's worthy of somebody cheating on her because she's not good enough, right? And so that's why it keeps looping in her reality. And as soon as she stopped looping that in her reality, through the emotional healing, now she's with a partner and she's getting engaged, and he's super amazing, right? And so it can really, really change when we look at the pink flamingo example, and then we look at examples of these deeper things, right? It's all the same work, but one's just going to be a little bit deeper emotional work, right? Because you got to tap into why you believe that. There's not really that many opposing stories around pink flamingo, like I said. So then that's why you'll end up seeing that. And exactly, one time I decided I was getting a Mazda, and all of a sudden I saw Mazdas everywhere. Like, this is how the subconscious works. And reality is just a mirror of your subconscious. So this is why being a conscious creator takes a lot of responsibility, because like Spider-Man says, with great power, there comes great responsibility. And that's what I always say, because, it's not easy to accept that I'm creating that, my reality, right? When it comes to cheating or being abused, or oh, my manager always hates me, my boss always hates me. Well, you're staying in those situations. So who's really in charge here, right? And so that's the part of it that's also hard to accept, because the ego doesn't want to accept that. So I do a lot of work around the ego when it comes to subconscious stuff.
How hard is it to get people, especially with the ego, to understand that and not play the blame game, because it's so easy
Yeah.
to blame
Just
the
dip into that.
outside forces than to actually take accountability.
Yeah. So this is on the consultation. I ask a lot of questions around this, because you have to have a lot of self-awareness. You have to be able to call yourself out, which is the ego's worst enemy, right? The ego's like, no, I'm good. You know what I mean? I don't need that. Or, oh, I can't admit that, right? I'm not jealous, right? I don't have jealousy problems, whatever it may be. Right. So I always like to tell people, this is going to be a journey of you loving yourself and accepting yourself. And a huge part of that is to accept where you're at, and the ego's not going to accept that, right? So I let them know that we're going to be doing a lot of things, because another worst enemy of the ego not only is exposure, but it's shame, right? So I have them say, I need you to be really honest about this narrative, the first narrative or the old narrative that I tell them, right? I'm like, you got to tell me really honestly what goes on in your mind, right? You got to push past the ego or the shame. I'm not here to judge you, right? You have a safe space. So I usually like ask them that, because, and I ask them, like, you have to take full responsibility. And most of the time, You know, how I can tell somebody's ready is if they've tried everything. You know, they've tried everything. They've blamed their outer reality a lot. You know what I mean? And then they've just realized it just doesn't work. And they notice the loops and the patterns, right, of their reality constantly happening, right? And they start to realize it's no longer the outside, it's something inside. And this is why with coaching, the investment is personal, right? It's an investment in yourself because you have to be able to break that ego and be able to drop, you know, drop something on it, right? Like I am betting on myself to get through these old patterns, right? I'm going to humble myself, right? And be able to say, yes, I do think like this. I do take things very personally, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And this is what I always say. I always tell people to give themselves a lot of grace, because my clients that struggle with their ego the most, they still get the result, right? Especially my year long, right? They'll still get the result, but it'll take them a lot longer and they'll fight it a lot more, right? If they're not taking that accountability and giving themselves grace. So if they're beating themselves up for their story, you know, they're beating themselves up for what happened to them, you know, that's when I'm like, all right, we can't even do the new narrative because I need you to practice grace and patience. I need you to exercise those muscles right now because it's okay. It's okay that everything that all that. I mean, obviously it sucks, right? But you have to be able to have that grace because then, right? Because we're not learning to, because blame is very different than responsibility, right? Like responsibility is coming from a place of power and self-love. Blame is coming from a place of self-hate. And usually if there is a lot of clients that struggle with that, that's a whole other set of narratives we got to get into. So, like I said, I work a lot with inner demons. So blame, guilt, shame, all those things have their own specific narratives and what they tell us, right? And so that's kind of what I get into as well when it comes to that. But accountability, responsibility is very important when coming in to work with me. For sure.
So,
For sure.
so like obviously, like this is not stuff that happens in one session. So like, how long approximately do people stay with life coaches, and what's like a rough estimate of rates as far as pay goes, like for clients to hire?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. So I would say 2 years is a really good amount of time. Even just 1 year, right? Like I think that the 8 weeks, right? Every life coach is different with the way they structure. I just really enjoy the way that my systems, I guess I would say. So 8 weeks, usually you start to break through a few things, right? You get a breakthrough. And that's really what I want. I really want people to just have a breakthrough, right? And some people, they're just so ready that they'll have many breakthroughs in the 8 weeks, right? And so, like I said, they want more, right? So usually by the 7th or 8th call, my clients are like, how can I keep doing this? Because I know that there's a lot more, skeletons in my closet that I got to get into, right? Like, and this is what I always say, especially with subconscious reprogramming. Yes, maybe you're 30 years old and you have 30 years of like the same old narratives repeating and all that, but it's not going to necessarily take you 30 years to rewire it, right? Just like a good solid year can do a lot to at least give you the framework to then afterwards, right? Like I'll usually know when a client kind of graduates me, and I want them to, right? I want them to be able to not have to rely on me and understand the mind, understand thoughts, understand emotions, understand the ego. So then that way they'll be able to continue to do this work on their own. That to me is success. So usually 1, 2 to 3 years max is what I recommend, right? Depending on like how many results you're getting, how much of the ego did you get through, right? Because some of my clients, like they'll start out, they do a year with me and they're full force, like into taking full responsibility of their reality. And then their second year, they just kind of need me in a backup, almost like an insurance. So I'll kind of have them, instead of weekly calls, be in once a month calls with me for a year, right? And so as far as the investment goes, it has to be enough to break your ego because these are patterns that have been going for a long time. So when I first started, my programs were $800 for 8 weeks, right? And I kid you not, now my programs are $2,500 for 8 weeks. And the results that my clients are getting are 100 times more. 100 times more. You best believe if they're paying, over $1,000, over $2,000, they're showing up on every call, right? They're going to take in what I'm telling them. They're going to get uncomfortable, right? Because if I'm telling them, hey, if it's somebody that doesn't know how to practice healthy boundaries in their life, and they're the yes man to everybody in their life, and then they wonder why they're so burnt out and why they're so exhausted and why they're depressed, right? So you best believe that investing that much is going to make you do those practices, the soul work that I'm giving them every week. And I give them digestible things because, like we said, this isn't something that could happen overnight. But even if that soul work this week is, I want you to say no when you really mean no. And when your mind is saying yes, right? Let's just say the activity was around boundaries. They're more likely to be able to do that soul work if they're invested enough to where it presses them. So that's why coaching has a lot to do with the investment being for the client. It's in service to the client. My coach, so I had a coach actually who helped me. She was my business coach. So like I said, sometimes, right? Like I said, I'd wanted to be a life coach since 2016, but I never jumped on it because I was too scared to share my story. I was too scared to put myself out there. I was too scared to be an entrepreneur. I was too scared to just start a business in general and start charging for services. Like I had a lot of limiting beliefs around all that stuff. So she really broke me, right? So my first year with her was 15K. I didn't have that money, but I decided that I was going to be the woman to figure it out. And somehow, right, it was split between 6 months. Somehow every month I was able to pay off my card, and I didn't even get clients in the first 3 months. So I was, kind of working at a winery on the side, but that's really what made me change. That's what really made my life completely different in a year, right? Was because I decided that instead of putting all this money is energy, right? I was always investing, not even investing, just spending, right? Like on drinks or going out or like all these things. I started reallocating that money towards something I really wanted, which was to change, to break my patterns, to be able to have this thing that I've been wanting for so long, right? And so whether it's a business coach, whether it's, like I said, patterns that you're wanting to change, I think the investment has to be well over 1,200 in order to get the results, because it has to break that part of the ego where we will actually show up.
And how, as far as your business goes now, how has the pandemic affected that, either negatively or positively?
Oh, business was booming for me for the pandemic. So I actually, launched in 2020 in January, and like I said, I didn't get any clients the first 3 months because I was still rewiring my own mind, right? I had no idea how to sell anything, right? I always knew how to serve, but I never knew how to do the whole, I had to get through my imposter syndrome. So 3 months in was when the pandemic hit in March. And it was interesting how that's when my services were needed a lot, because people didn't have their distractions anymore. They didn't have their happy hour every weekend. They didn't have their social life every weekend that was just numbing, right? Their inner world. So now that there was nothing to distract, people were forced to sit at home with their thoughts. And that's when I realized the most people started reaching out to me. Right. And I still have a client now. She's on her 3rd year with me that started with me right around then. And she's gotten amazing results. And so the pandemic was interesting because I almost felt like it was time. It was the perfect time for me to start, and I helped a lot of people work through the anxiety that was pandemic related, but then also just the anxiety of being able to sit with yourself and be able to have a good relationship with yourself to where you can be alone with yourself and feel good and not have anxiety or depression or any of those demons kind of taking over.
What are your best strategies as a life coach?
Yeah. Like my personal life.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually being a coach is so interesting because in my personal life, because I'm human too, right? So I have my own things I'm healing always, right? I always think there's more that we can grow in. So in my personal life, what's really interesting as a coach is I give advice, right? I provide guidance, I provide mentorship. So I have to practice what I preach, right? So, I have to make sure that I'm journaling. I have to make sure that I'm doing yoga and meditating. And not only that, making sure that in the moment when shit hits the fan in my life, if I'm manifesting or creating something that's, maybe off of an old story in my reality, I have to go within and take responsibility. So with the narrative flipping, because I've done that now to a point where for years and years and years, I've been on this journey of healing myself for 10 years. So now with the narrative flipping, I could do it on the spot, which is awesome. So that's something that I tend to do on the spot. So if there's something that I'm making a really big assumption about, right, about myself due to it. So let's say I get rejected, right? Let's say that I hear a no from somebody, or let's say that I really want something and then it ends up not happening. My biggest strategy is to watch my mind and where it's going. I allow myself to feel, right? Because now I love to let myself feel. I used to never let myself feel. I let myself feel the disappointment, the rejection, all of that. But one of my best strategies is I no longer let it touch my identity. I no longer have it be, I am rejected. I am a person that gets rejected. I am never going to make it, right? No, I let myself say, no, I am feeling rejected. I am feeling not valued instead of saying I am not valued. Just that little change by adding the word feel into the codes of our mind creates such a difference, because then the subconscious is picking it up and saying, oh, she's feeling that. It's almost like it gives power over the feeling rather than letting the feeling take power over you by identifying it, but not by addressing it, but not identifying with it, right? So I am feeling this, but I am not this, right? So I always make that very clear, because now that I've rewired a lot in my mind, it's all about sustaining the mental garden, right? So that's our responsibility. The narratives in our mind and our identity is our responsibility once we get into this work, and even when we're deep into the work. So as a coach, I'm also a student. As a coach, I'm always practicing. So that's one of the number one strategies out of many that I tend to use whenever I'm in a pickle, or whenever something, let's just say my tire pops and I have like an important thing to get to. I tell myself, somehow this happening in my reality is somehow serving me. And that's already changing the narrative about it. So then that way, whatever happens after that, I'll actually be able to see, right, how that thing served me, saved me, was in my favor, because my mind's going to now find a reason to believe that, because I changed the belief on the spot, right? Whereas if I said, oh, this means that everything's going to shit, this always happens to me, nothing ever works out for me, because then my mind is going to try to prove that story, right? So I always try to be really mindful of my narratives, and that little trick, that little strategy of being able to say, I feel this rather than I am this. Language is really important. So we're speaking our reality into existence, right? And thoughts are in words. So that's a really good strategy that I use myself.
Yeah, that's great. Because I was just thinking, I always hear people talk about, like, as far as outside sources go, they'll say, like, this person made me this, or this person made me that. And it's such a great strategy to think of, that to change that to, they made you feel a certain way, but they didn't make you, to right. Stop that narrative that what they're doing, how it made you feel is not who you are,
yes.
In the long. So I think that I've always, like, that's something I tell people that all the time, like, no, they made you feel that way. But, like, that's such a great strategy to prove that further. Like, okay, but how does it pertain to you as a person? Like, it doesn't. Like, that's just how you're feeling in the moment, and, like, not letting people get that far into your identity as far as what they're doing to you from an outside perspective. So that's great. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then as far as coaching goes, are there different types of coaching? And then how would someone, like, prepare themselves to go into a session of for life coaching?
Yes. So yeah, there's different types of coaching. So like I said, sometimes there's coaches that just want to help hold you accountable. Like she said, a weight loss coach, or like I said, I hired a business coach, right? Of course, she was helping me with a lot of internal beliefs that I had, like my imposter syndrome, but she was holding me accountable to making sure I was posting and like sharing my story and like doing all these very vulnerable things to be able to attract my ideal clients, right? So there are different types of coaches, right? And then for me, I'm like a subconscious healing coach. So I help people with their insides so that they can manifest outwardly and create the reality that they want outwardly, right? And so it's like a two-way thing. It's action, but then also let's go within. So when you're going into a consultation, I would say be prepared with what your goals are. So because coaching is so results oriented, like I get so high when my clients get the results, right? And so in order to get a result, you have to have an intention or a goal. So I would say get as clear as you can. Sometimes my clients do come to me and they don't really have goals, but maybe the goal is to start to make goals for their life. So maybe they really just struggle a lot with even setting goals because maybe they're too focused on other people, or maybe they've never really sat there and with themselves. So even a goal could be to make goals, right? To like start to make goals. And so I would say to go in with a goal, go in with an intention, go in with your story and get as vulnerable as possible, because that really helps me assess if I can really help somebody. If they really tell me, hey, I've been struggling with this for a long time. I've tried so many things. Nothing's worked out. And my goal is for this pattern, this loop to get better. So, like, I want to improve my relationships, but I really struggle with communication. I get very defensive when I need to communicate, or I have anger issues. I don't know how to not take things personally. So, that's like a really big goal, right? Or I don't know how to be present, like I've read The Power of Now. It makes so much sense to me conceptually, but I can't practice it for the life of me, right? I read so many self-help books, but nothing's actually changing in my life. I understand all these concepts conceptually, but I'm not living it, right? So those are really, really good things to go in, is ask yourself what in your reality is showing up that you're not happy with, and see if your coach can really help you get that result. Or even, like I said, even if it's 10%, 15%, 50%, like better than where you were at before with that goal.
And then there seems to be like an uptick in life coaches, like sort of trending in recent years. So what do you think that's due to?
I think that's due to the world wanting to become more self-educated now. So I think that a lot of people now, like I said, if I want to start a candle business, I don't really necessarily need to get my MBA anymore. I can just hire somebody who's a coach that specializes, has a niche in candle businesses, right? So same thing with the more healing aspects, right? So, I could go ahead and read about the subconscious mind, or I can go to somebody who's actually rewired theirs and got the results from it, and now is living a life that I really want to live, right? Whether they look so free, or I had somebody hire me because she knew she was a very conventional person and she wants to learn how to be unconventional. And she's like, I can't learn that from a book, right? So I resonate with you. I like your vibe. And we got on a consult and she was like, I want to learn how to be more free. I want to learn how to be more bold. So I think that that's why the coaching industry is kind of popping off, because even TikTok now has a whole educational side of it, right? Like YouTube has a whole educational side of it. And so I really think it's the self-education realm that's really switching in a lot of these paradigms that are changing, right? I almost feel like degrees aren't really going to have as much weight as they used to, right, in the 90s, because nowadays even companies are more investing in the person rather than what they have on paper. So what are your skills? And I think that the skills now people are going more towards skills as well. What are your talents, and so to brush up on those or to improve those, I think hiring a coach or a mentor is the way to go.
What are some of the stigmas you think are associated with your profession? And then second part is, what are some of the pros and cons of being a life coach? So what are some of the stigmas
Yeah.
associated, and what are some of the pros and cons of being a life coach, and challenges of being a life coach?
Yeah, I think the stigma is definitely like around the investment. I think a lot of people don't understand that it is in service to the client, because it almost like guarantees a result, because it's like the investment is what you need to press you. And for some reason, some people, money might not be the motivator. Maybe money's nothing to them, right? But for the most part, if somebody is fully invested and it's an uncomfortable amount, they will show up, and I find that that's usually when I, get on a consult, everything feels aligned. But at the end, when I share the investment, I share it just like this, I'm not hiding anything. I'm not tricking anybody, and I let them know that they have to be fully invested, I tend to get a lot of oppositions there. And I don't take it personally because I get it. It is a very scary thing to invest that much in yourself, to trust somebody, right? To trust somebody with your mind, with your emotions, with your story, with your results. And then at the end of the day, who are you trusting? You're trusting yourself. It's scary to trust yourself, And so I think that's one of the things that, if I could say there's a struggle there, is people not really understanding the investment part of it and how important it is to break an old pattern. And then I would say like other stigmas is people just think that, I don't know, that because you don't have your master's or your doctorate in psychology that you don't know what you're talking about. So I think that's another thing, and I try not to, I don't need to like convince people, my first year I had my cousin, somebody I'm close with actually tell me that I need to get my PhD and I don't need to do this. I don't need to coach, and I shouldn't be. And, it was my first year of business. So I was kind of fragile back then because I was like, oh shit, like I can't do this. I was about to throw in the towel. But then I remembered, if I'm taking it personally, then I'm identifying, with what someone else is telling me rather than, listening to maybe the 10 souls that do need me, right? It's like I can't ignore the fact that I can help people now, versus, if I went and got my PhD or whatever it may be, and I'd love to further my education. So it's not even about that. I think it's just the stigma around people like for instance, when I first started, I was really nervous that people would think that I don't have enough, that I'm not good enough, that I don't know enough. And so that was a huge thing too. Cause I was like, who am I to give people advice if I'm still healing and I'm still working on myself? But I had to remember we're all still working on ourselves. And as a teacher, I'm a student as well. And so I always try to just keep like no hierarchy between my clients and me. I'm very vulnerable with them every week about what I'm going through as well and how I'm getting through it, because I feel like it helps them a lot, and I can. And so it helps them a lot to hear those personal stories. So I guess the stigma is just that I think that I know everything because I'm a coach, and that's really not what it is. I don't know everything, and I'm fully open to admitting that. And I make sure my clients know that, right? Like I'm not here to fix all your problems. I'm not here to actually heal you because you're healing yourself. I'm just holding the space for you to do that. And you're showing up every week so that you can do that. And so I think that's the number one stigma, is that like people think that because somebody is a coach, they know everything and that they're perfect. And it's not the case at all.
And what are some of the pros and cons of being I guess, and challenges of being a life coach?
The pros are amazing. I feel like my work is so rewarding. Yeah, it's so rewarding. I feel like once my clients have breakthroughs and they're picking up on what I'm throwing down, and they're understanding the tools that I'm giving them, the books that I recommend to them, the podcasts I'm having them listen to, the YouTube videos, the practices I'm giving them. When it clicks for them, man, I get like, oh, such a surge of dopamine, like such a surge of serotonin. I start jumping around the room. Like, I feel like the pros is that when I see my clients get results, I get super happy because that like just makes my heart feel so good, because I know what it feels like to be in such a low place. And also I know what it feels like to take the responsibility and change those things yourself. And then like they start manifesting things in their reality because they change the things in their mind. So when they start attracting things in, like their partner, like right now I'm helping a lot of people with their relationships. So either, different versions of their partner will start manifesting, or they will start to attract their partners. And I've had a couple clients either now that are getting engaged or they are engaged. And so those types of results I mean, excuse my language, it just makes me wet. Like I just get so aroused. I get so happy because I'm just like, holy shit, this is real, you know? So I feel like that's the pros, is that it's super rewarding. I love it. Two, it's given my life so much purpose because now I like feel like I have a reason to live. So even if I'm going through a lot in my personal life, let's say I'm depressed, let's say I'm going through or I'm feeling depressed, I'm catching myself there. Let's say I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling anxious, right? Like I feel like now I have such a purpose to live that these people look to me as a leader, right? And it just gives me such a reason to be alive and show up for myself. So I feel like this work is saving my life. I know it sounds really dramatic, but it's true. So that's really the pros in it, is that it forces me to, and not force in a way where like I don't want to do it. It like it helps me, it inspires me to keep learning and healing through my own shit. So that I can keep growing and I can keep setting that example, like people like Neville mentioned earlier, like I have a tour company out here. And so sometimes people will see me on yachts and like doing all this cool stuff. And I always try to tell them, I never thought this would be imaginable for me, right? Like, and that's what happened. It's like I literally went in and just changed the stories, and these things just started happening to me. Like started happening in my life. And so I really enjoy inspiring people and showing people that their thoughts can create their reality. So that's really what the pro is for me, is that I'm showing people how to get out of their own way. And so that's a huge pro for me, because then they're just so powerful, right? And they're not relying on me. I always tell them, don't be like me. I want you to be more like you. And so you're the truest, most highest version of you. And so that's really rewarding. I guess there's a lot of pros for me. The hours are great too. I get to choose my schedule being an entrepreneur. So that's always nice. I get to create a lot of fun content. I've broken through a lot of my own layers around shame. So one pro is that I've gotten really vulnerable on my platform about my own life. And I never thought I'd be able to get vulnerable like that. I've never been a shy person, but when it comes to like vulnerable things, like I used to get really like, oh, I don't want people to see me as weak. So I feel like a huge pro is that I leap, so that other people can leap as well and just own their stories. So that's a huge pro for me as well. I also love just being able to like provide guidance if I can help somebody. So that's really fun. I make my own hours. I guess there's not really a lot of cons for me on a personal level. I love what I do. I can't really think of any cons
Any
at all.
challenges?
Challenges, turning off my analytical brain. So like, like I'm always analyzing people, in my on my calls, and I have so many stories, right? I mean, I have 10-year-long clients, so that's about 10 hours a week, but on each call I'm very focused and I'm listening, and there's a lot of stories in my brain, of like different lives, and I've served over 40 clients until now, and so I've really analyzed. Sometimes I'll even think about old clients, and I'm like always analyzing. And so another thing that I struggle with sometimes is challenging is in my personal life to turn off that part of my brain, because I don't need to be analyzing my boyfriend all the time, or analyzing my sister, or analyzing my mom or my dad. I always try to like, it's like good to be a deep person, but then at the same time, it's like I need to be not as deep, because like I need to just be human and have a lot of fun, because
And
I
living.
notice when I'm not having fun, or I'm not getting into, let's say, just like the material world enough, like the superficial side of life, where like, yes, I just want to go, I don't know, dance, or like I want to go do, like I don't need to make everything so deep, and so I've been watching my mind when it feels challenged whenever I'm over analyzing, because then I feel like I can't show up as powerfully for myself. So that's something I struggle with that I'm working on.
All right. I just want to say thank you for one thing that you said here that we'll never forget. SP and Morgan is the first time anybody has said that they get wet. And so I just want to say I love that. That was amazing. That's one for the history book. So that's memorable. And then when it comes to like your social media, something that was really memorable to me, seriously, but that just hit me there. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So, but one thing on your social media, I love your shorts and your snippets. They're amazing. You give away a lot of free content and a lot of jewels that can be life changing. That's what really made me gravitate towards you and say, hey, I want you on the show. You can
Thank
get
you.
as deep as you want with this or not, no pun intended. But there was a post that I did see with you where I don't know if it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and you wrote in there like it seemed like you were in a club or a lounge or something, and music was playing. You said, "Can you picture that I am not happy in this current place?" But yet you were smiling, the music was playing, this and that. I just want to know if you could take us to that, not girl, but younger version of yourself and how you ended up here. Yeah, right? In like 2 minutes or less. But just roughly, what was that journey like? Because it definitely was not environmental. It definitely was not the circumstances. And you definitely performed and put on the face like everything was great. Is that too
Yeah.
much to ask? It's up to you. Whatever comfort level you feel, I want you to get into that, please, because it touched me when I saw that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, and I'm an open book, so I feel like this is really important to talk about. So there was a trend on TikTok, and it was like basically you post a video of you where you look super happy, right? You look really happy, and then in the caption you put on like the voice or whatever, and it says something along the lines of like, "I bet nobody would know that this is when I was in my lowest moment." Right. And so in this video that Neville's talking about, I was at a reggae club, one of my favorite reggae clubs, and I was dancing and I was smiling and I was vibing. And that was a point in my life in 2017 where I was crying every single day because I was going through a lawsuit with my ex. And there was a lot of manipulation. There was a lot of, I lost all of my confidence that year, all of my confidence that year. I hated myself. I hated myself. I lost a lot of my confidence because somebody, they did it again. You know what I mean? Like I had already been in a manipulative relationship before, and then they did it again. And obviously, this is not to bash my ex or anything, right? Like I said, this whole journey is about taking responsibility. But at that year of my life, I was a victim and I needed that. I needed to be in that space because it showed me a lot to go that low. It really humbled me. It really humbled me to see that I made such a huge mistake. And I wish I didn't cry so much that year, but I was releasing and shedding a lot. And nobody would have known because that was still a point in my life where, like a lot of us, we don't feel comfortable to share, right? It's really scary to share when you're not doing good, right? So I would go to work and still be the happy little Navi. Everybody was seeing me smile. I would still go out. Everybody saw me happy and I was always the life of the party. But inside, I was breaking. Any moment I had alone, I was crying. I had a lot of anxiety. So that was, I mean, I think I got pretty deep in there, but, you know, I was going through a very, very rough patch, very, very rough patch in my life. And I felt unsafe. I felt very unsafe. So when I mentioned anxiety, I felt really unsafe. And I knew I got myself into that situation. So I was beating myself up. I was blaming myself and I hated myself. And in that video, you would have never thought that because I was dancing and I was vibing. I was throwing up my signs. I was at a reggae club, and so yeah, I really liked that trend in a lot of ways because it helped connect, right, for a lot of people.
Um, what would be like advice or blueprints or anything that you could tell people or you would leave behind for anyone who's interested in doing what you do?
In becoming a coach or
Yeah,
coaching
Yes.
with
becoming a life
people?
coach.
Oh, yes. So I think that if you really want to serve and you've been through it, right? So, like I said, whether this is a coach that isn't really doing the deeper subconscious work, even if it's just losing weight or start helping somebody start a business, or like I said, I have a friend who literally coaches people with ADHD to help them with their business or their projects, right? Or whether it's deep, deep inner work. If you have a very interesting story and you know that you're at a point, right? Because you kind of hit a point in your healing or in your process where you're like, wow, I just got amazing results. And not everybody's going to get to this point where they want to start sharing that gift or sharing their secrets or sharing their results. And that's okay. Or sharing how to get results. And that's okay. But if you're a person that really, really desires to give that gift away, to be able to serve, I would say go for it. I'm also a business consultant for coaches, for consultants, for life coaches. And I always tell them, you know, you're going to have to work through your imposter syndrome. You know, you're going to have to work through, and, you know, even that might not last that long, depending on how bad you want it. How bad do you want to serve? Right? Because then I can just really teach you and you'll get clients right away. And what's really beautiful is you get your ideal client. So you manifest your clients, you create the clients that like resonate with your story. So I would say, like, if you have a really amazing story and you've changed a lot and you've created a huge transformation within yourself and you want to help other people do it, now is the time. Now is the time, because people need this more than ever to be able to invest in somebody that's like, that has the life that they want to create for themselves, you know, or has the mindset or has the emotional intelligence or whatever it may be, right? That you really want, because the self-education world and being able to hire mentors, I think is really important. So if it's something you've always wanted to do, I think you should go for it. And you're never going to feel fully ready, because like I said, I was always like, how do I know I'm ready? Like, I am still healing through a lot. But I just realized, like, it doesn't even matter how many years, but I happen to be 10 years into my own practicing these tools that I share. But it's not really about years. It's about, like, when do you feel comfortable enough to share your story and be able to guide people through that? And then just, you know, do it. And I highly recommend hiring a business coach for it.
You know, we talked about training and kind of certification, but are there any, I don't want to call it up training, but like it's the only word I can think of that you do as far as keeping yourself like in the know about new any strategies or any new just anything new that would help you. Yeah, tools that helps you with your clients.
Yes. So definitely, like, if you're not the type of person, because I do my research every single week, you know what I mean? I'm always making sure to, you know, follow either amazing pages, you know, that can really, really help me. Or I'm always like on Google or like researching myself like every week, you know what I mean? Like on YouTube, and I'll like see what resonates and all that. But I definitely recommend as a coach that you do a training every year, or like I host retreats. So I usually go to a retreat by somebody that I highly respect. Like I said, I'm a student as well. So I would recommend always staying a student and like putting yourself out there, increasing, because the more you increase your skills and your tools and your certifications, the more you're learning, the more value you have, right? So I think like your value increases, because then you know these new tools and you're not staying stuck. So right now I'm like the narrative work, but then like I said, now I'm hosting a couples retreat, for instance. Now the universe keeps sending me people for their you know, I keep attracting clients that need help with their relationships. And I am now currently in the healthiest relationship I've ever been in, you know? And so we both are hosting a retreat in November. Until November, you best believe we are going to be hiring relationship coaches ourselves. We are going to be doing our research. We're having sessions every week to learn better communication skills, how to have better sex, how to have better intimacy, how to have, you know, what is intimacy, right? Attachment styles, what are triggers, why is your partner a mirror for your deeper and darkest insecurities, and like how to do the mirror work, right? So I'm always looking into how can I improve my skills before I hold space, right? And so I'm definitely going to be hiring the experts. I'm definitely going to be going and attending seminars or anything like that. So I highly recommend that for every coach, every person who's teaching, you know, be able to be a student and constantly improve their toolkit.
What are some of the challenges you face as being a female life coach versus male life coach? And then on top of that, like, what are the, because now I think about it, even like in education in general, you know, women tend to, I feel like women tend to be the majority there. Like, are there a lot of men as life coaches? And then what challenges do you face being a female versus male side of it?
That is such a good question. There is it's definitely a female dominated industry. I mean, I don't see or know of many men's coaches, and I feel like there needs to be more. I feel like it's getting there. I myself have had 4 male clients in the past 3 years, you know? And so I think men just need to be more encouraged to okay, so like masculine energy in general, it's not a bad thing, but in general, they have more ego, right? And that's on a chemical level too. Testosterone is a lot different than, you know, estrogen, right? And so the fact that we're more empathetic, the fact it's like a feminine and masculine, and that's like an energetic thing too. It's not no like I have masculine and feminine energy. Everybody does, right? It's the action part of ourselves or the, you know, setting boundaries and doing all those things, or it's the understanding, the compassion, the intuition. So what I see in men is that there is a little bit more ego and they need to be able to say, yes, I do need help, you know? And so I think that that's something that like more men should be encouraged to do. I don't necessarily think men need a male coach, but I think that it's helpful. I think it's helpful to have a man and to have that experience of being a man and learning from a man, right? So, like, if there was a men's coach that teaches emotional intelligence and how to be mindful, right, about emotions, right? A man learning from a man on that perspective is going to be a whole different level, I feel like, of respect and all that. And like understanding, oh shit, like you used to be in that too, where you used to never understand emotions and now you do. So I can learn that. Does that kind of answer your question? So kind of on the men and women aspect, what was the first part of the question again?
Like what challenges do you face being a female life coach versus, you know, the men in that profession?
Yeah, so I would say like as a female, I would say like when men hire me, it just takes them a little bit longer to open up. You know what I mean? So that's something that I sometimes struggle with. But it's not it just takes a lot more questions, right? I just have to ask a lot more questions because I feel like once they get those juices flowing and they can answer something, then I think they get more vulnerable. So that's really nice. As a female, I don't think I've ever dealt with people not taking me seriously, so that's been good, you know, but I know that, you know, that's something that females struggle with in general, you know, and I would say that's pretty much it. I don't struggle too much, I feel like, as a woman, but there are many women in the industry, so I definitely feel like there should be a lot more men.
Yeah. Well, you talked about how like people who they go through the process with a life coach and then they end, some of them end up being life coaches themselves, right? Wasn't that some
Yes.
the process? Yeah. So I makes you wonder, like, because you don't have a lot of men who are seeking that kind of service, then they're not making that jump to being the mentor themselves. I mean, do you think that's a lot of the correlation of why you don't see a lot of men as life
Mhm.
coaches?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I have one of my clients who was a doctor actually. He was a male and he's now wanting to get into this industry or like host retreats or coaching or mentorship, but I really think it's because exactly what you said. Like I just feel like because they're not as prone to hiring somebody
Mhm.
for their inner work or their help, but I think it's getting there slowly. Like once I think men just need to feel safe, right? They need to feel safe in their emotions on like a next level. And safe in vulnerability where like it doesn't mean that you're less of a man if you talk about your traumas, you know what I mean, instead of just brushing them off. You know, I think that more men need to feel more comfortable. I actually have a female coach, which is interesting that I'm, you know, she's been working with me for 2 years and now I'm her business coach for her coaching business. And it's interesting. She actually attracts most of her clients are men. So I find that very interesting too, of like a lot of females come to me, a lot of men come to her. And I always wonder why. But I think energetically, maybe she's a lot more direct, whereas
Mhm.
like I go really deep into like the emotional stuff. So that might be it. I'm not too sure why, but I definitely want to see more men. I think it is a correlation between men reaching out for this help because only once you've really worked on it yourself can you then guide other people and other men.
Right. Right. And then as far as how do you think ethnicity, you being a minority woman yourself, and race play a factor in your profession, as far as pricing rates, your clientele, any issues or problems you deal with, to help you with your clients on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I was just talking to my partner about this the other day. It's almost like an anomaly now to like be a brown woman as a coach, right? I mean, I don't see that many Black or brown or people of color as coaches in the industry myself, because obviously I've gone to networking events. I go to different events myself. I mean, believe it or not, I'm Indian and I've gone to yoga teacher events and yoga festivals, and I'm the only one of the only brown people there, the only Indian woman there. And it comes from my culture. So I definitely see this as a problem. I see it as a reason of more of a reason of why I need to be this leader that I am, because like I said, I don't even promote it this way, but I naturally only attract like 90% of my clients are women of color. And I think it's beautiful because like I said, now they're becoming coaches, or they're going into their families, or a lot of them are healing their own family dynamics, and like why, going in and like working on that with their families. And I see it, and I see it as a problem because there's this narrative that only white people can afford coaching. Only white people can afford mentorship. And I think that that's the thing. We should all be wanting to grow. I think we should all be wanting to, if it's not in coaching, that's fine, but being able to even invest in other things, right? I feel like there's a huge narrative in Black and brown people where it's like, oh, I can't possibly do that. Right. So switching that has been interesting. I'm really grateful for the clients that come to me that had that narrative, and then that was the first narrative that they had to switch even on the consultation, right? And so that's been really, really powerful, because I think now them investing in their growth is changing a lot of things, because I see a lot of people that are not women of color, right? Like hiring coaches and bettering their lives. And like I said, the inner work affects the outer. So they're over here now traveling, or they're doing these things that they never thought they could do, right? And I see a lot of these that predominantly in white people. But then when it comes to Black and brown communities, they still have the narratives like, oh, we can't do that, you know? And so being able to change that and to see the wealth that comes into my clients' lives, or the prosperity, or the better relationships, right? That's been really, really amazing, because like they're healing and they're creating better lives for themselves by investing in mentorship. And so yeah, that narrative, I actually had a friend who is brown who came up to me and said, "Are all of your clients white?" And I was like taken back by it, because I wasn't expecting that. And I said, "Actually, it's the opposite. I only have one or two. Actually, just one right now." And they were shocked, because they literally told me, "Oh, I feel like only white people would invest money into that."
That's crazy.
Right?
That's such well, and I guess I don't have that experience for that. So, but I mean, that's just insane to hear. Um,
Yeah.
do you
Well, if we
think
think
that,
about therapy, if we think
yeah,
about therapy, I feel like in a lot of Black and brown culture, it's like almost ingrained that like, oh, there's nothing wrong. Like, like you don't need to go get help. Like there's more of a stigma behind it as well. And so I see that also. And I feel like more therapists now as well that I'm seeing that are of color are providing that space for that, right? And so because I had like Indian clients come to me, and I asked them like, why'd you choose me? And they were like, no one, if I hired a white coach and I explained to her how I'm 30 years old and my parents are forcing me to get married to somebody that I don't want to marry, they're not going to understand that. They're just going to
right.
think I'm crazy, because it's a cultural difference, right? And so that's kind of like, I encourage more Black and brown people out there to start, coaching, because they will, and even becoming therapists, because like they're going to attract people that, that will relate to them, and that's going to really help on a global scale.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the cultural thing, like how you navigate that when it comes to cultures that are different than your own, like and how difficult, like, is it more difficult to get people to break those barriers?
Yeah, like the people that are of my culture, the people that aren't, that I
That
see.
are different. Well, actually, either one. I mean, and ones that you do already know about, and then the ones that you'd have to do like some research on, like the ones that you're not familiar with.
Yeah, so growing up, like I was pretty involved in the Indian community, and obviously like my family's Indian, so I had a lot of that knowledge of like what are the narratives in that culture and what did I break out of? And usually that's what they look for. They're like, "Wow, this person broke out of that. Her family didn't disown her. They actually support her. Like how did she get that to happen?" Right? And so that is like super relatable. And then on the other end, whenever it's, and because I grew up American, which is great because I did grow up around, as much as I identify as Indian woman, like, I still grew up in the States. So I do understand that culture as well, right? I do understand that. And so, let's just say it was somebody, let's say that's LGBTQ, right? And they came to me. And let's say I'm not going to understand specifically, right, that from that eye, right, from that perspective, right, I hold the space and I let them know that I will never fully understand, right, I will never fully understand, but I can help you love yourself and heal your self concept through the narratives, right, that are no longer, because I know what it feels like to have an identity that you chose or like that you feel of who you are, and then the world robbing you of that, or maybe someone telling you who you are other than you choosing, or you telling the world who you are. So I try to always empathize the most that I can, but if it's ever a culture or a background that I'm not fully like I can't fully say that I understand, I'll never say that I will fully understand, but I can always try. And I think that the philosophy classes that I took really helped me because I was able to kind of like shift and like be like almost like a shapeshifter and like kind of morph my perspective of like, okay, so this is how that felt, right? And then I'll like ask them and then we'll go through exactly what that felt like because I love to describe the emotions that they're feeling in order to have that healing occur, right? So it might be anger, but then I'm like, okay, but what type of anger were you feeling when that happened? And then they're like, okay, it was frustration, or it was jealousy, or it was rage, or it was, discomfort. So I'll like go into that and go into that and go into that and peel those layers to the point where I will get to a place where they feel the most understood and seen. It's really important to feel seen.
Let's talk about, or have you tell us about your, I hope I say this right, is it Tulum tours?
The what?
I don't know if I'm saying that, Tulum tours?
Tulum, yes. My
Tulum,
tour
there you
company.
go. Yes.
Yes. Yes. So I host retreats. I own two other businesses. So I host retreats and I do that with my partner who's local. He's Mexican. And I also own a tour company with him. So we host retreats out here. We've hosted 3 so far. I was doing just women's retreats, and then I did my first co-ed retreat, and now I have a retreat that's based on relationships and couples. And then the tours are basically really unique experiences. This land here that I live on, so Tulum, Cancun, Playa del Carmen, all of this Riviera Maya and Yucatan Peninsula is Mayan land. So my partner is very, very well educated on the Mayan land. Not only that, the Anahuac. So on our tours, we take people to also very exclusive places because we don't take people to all the tourist traps where there's just like a bunch of people and it's all just for marketing or just whatever it is. We take people to private places. So for example, my partner has built a relationship with a Mayan family that owns a cenote, right? So they have a cenote on their land, and cenotes are underground channels of water. So it's underground rivers, and there's thousands of them here. So they, in the Mayan culture, heaven was not above, it was underground. So it's considered heaven. So we usually give people a tour, but it's also a very cultural experience to the pre-Hispanic Mexico. So the indigenous people of Mexico. So all of the tribes, and not only Mexico, but from Alaska to Nicaragua was actually all called the Anahuac before Christopher Columbus came and like started, the territorial and the Europeans came. And so that we on our tours, long story short, we do a lot of education on the indigenous knowledge. And so people don't lose this knowledge that's getting unfortunately very, very lost because of just how old it is, right? It's thousands of years old. So that's kind of what we do here. We do tours that are very, very fun. We pack up our cooler with beer and mezcal and wine, and we take people to these amazing places. We take people to the ruins as well. So a lot of Mayan ruins on archaeological sites. So that's always very educational and very awesome, along with the cenotes. Neville was talking about yachts. So we do take people to yachts. We love hosting parties, birthdays, celebrations, bachelorette parties, bachelor parties. So all that. So that's kind of like the more exciting, very fun. Coaching is very fun, but it's a lot of deep work. This is more the lighter, fun work that I get to do. And my partner is the one who's very informative and educational.
Can you get a little deeper into like the ayahuasca culture and if it's offered on your retreats and what is it for? And I guess the westernizing of it, now the Hollywoodification of it, Will Smith, etc., etc. Just kind of, can you give us a brief overview of that?
Absolutely, Neville. So if somebody was to not know at all what ayahuasca is, they'd probably heard of psilocybin mushrooms. If they've never heard of psilocybin mushrooms, I feel like I could start there. So psychedelic medicines have been used for thousands of years. Traditionally, a lot of people now will just go and do them and have a trip with their friends in the forest, but traditionally they were medicines used in South America, Central America for subconscious healing, for healing the mind. Particularly back then, they used to heal demons within ourselves, right? So, what is that? That is the darker aspects of ourselves, like I mentioned, depression, anxiety, PTSD, ancestral trauma. Sometimes people can put curses on you. And what are curses? They are just words, they are spells. So if somebody tells you you're not good enough and you take in that code, that's a spell. I think sometimes we think of curses as like, may you always be, or now you're not fertile anymore, or like whatever it is, right? So it can start at that very extreme level, or it can be very, very simple, right? And so psychedelic medicines really help us to have an experience, right, of being egoless. We will never have an experience of being without an ego in this human experience, because we're in this world of duality where we have a spirit, but we also have an ego and identity, right? I say, my name is Navjot. This is my story. This is who my family is. I'm Indian. I'm this, I'm that. So it's basically like, this is what happened to me. That's our identity, right? So when you're on psychedelics, ayahuasca is a very, very strong psychedelic medicine. You're going to have the experience of not having an ego. So just being one with everything. Now, it sounds really great, but can be very intense for some people that haven't done already some work on themselves, because it can be very scary. It can be very scary to just like tap into like the oneness right away. Also, it can be dangerous to go in when it's not something you really need. So back in the day, they only used it as a medicine, and something that I'm seeing now more than ever in this new in the Western world is people just doing it more recreationally, which can be very dangerous because it's something that opens you up. You become very hypersensitive. I recommend it to people who have done a lot of inner work, who have meditated before, who know how to kind of have a hold over their mind, who have a good relationship with themselves. Because once you ingest that medicine, and everybody's experience is different, so I can't really even say how your experience is going to be. Surrender is a huge part of the experience. But I recommend doing it only in a ceremony setting with a trained medicine woman or shaman or medicine man. And that's another thing. There's a lot of fake shamans out there now because they've also gotten a hold that this is what the Western people want and they're willing to spend money on this. And so they're mixing up the brew. They're not making it properly. They're saying it's one thing when it's another. They're not really properly screening you. They're not working on the integration. So what you're actually experiencing when you do psychedelics, especially ayahuasca, is a very, very strong release of DMT in your brain. And DMT is the same chemical that secretes when you're born and when you die. And so a lot of people will have this experience of death, right? But really you're having an ego death. And, you know, when you come back from that trip, it's all about applying the lessons you learn from that, or else you're just going to go right back in your old habits. Neville and I were talking about Will Smith earlier because he talks about doing ayahuasca in his book, and he actually smacked, who was it? Who
Chris
was it? Who
Rock.
did he?
Chris Rock.
He smacked Chris Rock shortly after having this highly spiritual experience.
Out your mouth. Box you. I'm spiritual. Ayahuasca.
Right. So this is what I talk about with integration. I mean, you're never going to be perfect, right? After you do a plant medicine ceremony, right? I'm not going to lie. It's not that you're going to do it and be fully healed and not really project your emotions onto people, aka
but
punching them in the mouth.
You do not want to slap people on national television live. No. And then go viral after doing it and go, hey, you know what? It's the ayahuasca that made me do it.
It should actually be quite the opposite, because you should be integrating how to not project your emotions onto other people but all that. But
then he wins the
I
Oscar.
think that he might have had a little bit more work that he needed to do.
Then he wins the Oscar and then he's having to cry and he's releasing everything. So I guess the ayahuasca like hit him after when he won the Oscar. He's like, oh my gosh, I need to come clean.
Yes. Well, this is the thing. It makes you very sensitive, right? So even though you think you might have emotional regulation after, it might be the opposite effect where you're going to act on your emotions more because you are so sensitive. So it's definitely important to do some work on yourself pre and post medicine ceremony. I will share that for everybody out there that's curious.
So wait, let's just share the name of your retreat so that he can come there and get it done the right way. What's the name of the retreat? Will Smith.
Absolutely. This one's for couples, so maybe you could bring Jada too. But this
and the entanglement.
Yeah. Yeah, this retreat's going to be November 10th to the 14th. We're taking only 5 couples. There will be a plant medicine ceremony. We're going to, or I should say fungi medicine ceremony. We're going to be using mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, and we're going to be doing just a microdose because I don't really feel like people need to trip balls in order for them to have a deep experience. And I actually prefer the microdose because I want them to kind of still have their feet on the ground while we are healing, while we're in that space of healing. So it's going to be great to experience that with your partner. Will and Jada, if you're listening, please come through. I would love to have you there. And it's going to be in November. Yeah, it's going to be called Connection, I think. I haven't fully came up with a name yet.
Boxing gloves on him. We're going to pad his hands.
Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely. It's going to be called Divine Connection. I just came up with the name right now.
Boom! I love it.
Boom. Divine Connection, the retreat that you didn't even know you needed until now. Couples only. And I will be hosting a women's retreat right after that in Sedona. Very magical place as well. And yeah, but this is going to be the main offering right now.
So what are some other businesses or ventures you're currently working on or developing? I mean, you kind of said it, but just in general, what are some other businesses, ventures, or things you're currently working on?
I'm always working on something. So I have my coaching, I have the retreat business and the tours. I have a book that I'm writing right now. So I'm hoping to launch that by January 2023. It'll be a great New Year's gift. I hope that it is. My hopes for this book is even just for one person to read it and have it spark something in them. It's going to be all based around the ego. As far as the name goes, I want to stay on brand with the meta. So I'm thinking about calling it metamorphosis, a transformation through the ego into your spirit. So it's going to be all about darkness, shadow work, ego, how to love yourself through all of that, loving not just your best qualities, but also loving your story, loving your subconscious, loving your ego. It's okay. It just, it just wants some love too, so that it can be worked through. So that's kind of the next project that I have going on is my book launch.
I like books. So when you have it done, or you're ready to you got a link, make sure you send me a link, because I'm always looking for good books.
She loves books, Morgan.
I love books.
Oh, I'd love to. Yes, I'd love to. It's going to be pretty much just an expansion of everything that I spoke about today and more. There's going to be tools in there, knowledge, and also just personal stories.
That's great too, because like I'm also very like, I learn better when I'm reading, So like being able to have like even this that we're doing right here, and then that tool to read from as well. I think those always work well together. Not for a lot of people, I think they need both kind of ways of learning to fully like absorb what you're getting. So that's great that you're putting out a book for that too.
Yes, I love writing.
If you weren't a life coach, though, what are some of your other hobbies or interests that you would undertake if you had time, or for time permitting for those?
I love teaching yoga, but I guess that's kind of related to life coach and personal development. I recently really started loving making bouquets. So with flowers, I don't know why, but it's just like a newfound talent that I didn't know I had. Because at my retreats, love, yeah. And it was so funny when I was younger. I never really was into flowers. And so now I'm just so into them. And at all my retreats, this is how I discovered it. At all my retreats, I wanted to put personal touches in the houses and in the rooms of all my the people coming. And so I would make personalized bouquets for them, and I would just get a bunch of flowers, start putting them together, and I didn't realize how into it I was. Like each bouquet has its own personality. So maybe I have being a florist in my cards somewhere.
No, that's great. And I that probably makes people feel, I think that's such a great thing. And like something you're doing for yourself, but something also that another person can get from as well. Like to have something so personal, really, I'm sure helps that connection.
Yes.
As far as because you're living in Mexico, so what is life like living outside of the United States? The pros and the cons.
Man, it's awesome. People actually stop to talk to you. You go to the store and the people working there are just so happy to be there because people here, they're not really like living to work. They just work to live. And so that's the biggest difference that I saw, is that like not everybody's just so obsessed with work. And I in 2 years have rewired my brain so much, like in that sense, where I've slowed down. People really pause to speak to you like you're a human being. That's beautiful. I see mental health being, everybody has their own thing, but I just see like people here a lot more lighter, a lot more freer. The neighbors all know each other. They're all here to help each other. We all sit outside in our front porches. It almost reminds me of like, I don't know, like almost being in the Midwest or like, the South, where people actually still, in these smaller towns where people still connect with each other. But this is just like, even in the big cities, it's like that. You know what I mean? So that's really cool. A lot of nature. So I'm surrounded by jungle. I thrive in the jungle. I lived in Hawaii for a year as well. So I love being in the jungle. I'm always in the water. I really want to get my diving certification. Diving is a really big thing here. So I would just say I just feel more connected to the earth, to the planet, to being slow, like slowing down. A lot fresher food. Farmers markets are like a luxury in the States, and it's really sad that they're not available, right? Like you don't see farmers markets in Compton, but you will see them in Beverly Hills, and it's just like crazy how in other countries that's not a luxury thing. Like the farmer's market is just the market. Like that's where you go to get your groceries. You don't go to Walmart. I mean, they do have a Walmart, but that's not where the locals go to get their groceries. You know what I mean? Like nothing's like this big factory produced thing. Like everything's coming from the earth. So that was another huge difference that I noticed. Getting fresh juice every day, you know what I mean, isn't something that's a bunch of money to be able to get. You know, it's like very, very much a normal thing to be able to drink fresh juice, which obviously has its benefits, you know what I mean, and your gut health and everything, and just getting those enzymes, you know. And so it's great. I mean, I just really love it here. I've noticed my quality of life go much higher. I've noticed myself just have a lot more compassion for people as well. Like I said, everybody here, like they look at you in the eyes. It's kind of weird if you were just to like pass by and not really acknowledge somebody properly, you know? Like here they actually see it as rude, where in the States I feel like it's very accepted. I just describe Mexico as being like color, and every time I go back to the States now, I just see gray. I just see black and white or gray. It's really strange that somewhere that was home for me for 30 years now no longer feels that way.
So how long did it take you to like get used to that? Like was there like a long time, a period where you're like, I know you sound like you're still in awe, but like,
yeah.
like you're still like, oh my goodness. But like, how long did it take to kind of transition into that?
Actually, you know, I acclimated right away. Like I almost feel like I was so out of place in the States my whole life when I moved here. Like I just never felt like I belonged anywhere besides here. And I've always been one of those people that just moves everywhere. Like I lived in so many different cities in Southern California. I lived in Hawaii. I'm always traveling. I visited here for 6 days, and in those 6 days I just felt so at home and so acclimated and so natural. And I went back to San Diego and nothing felt right about me being in the States. So I booked a one-way ticket and I came back out a month later, and I just stayed ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to ask a handful of stuff. Let's just continue with that. Where would you like to see yourself 5 years from now? Where would you like to see yourself, and where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
I see myself married with at least one child. I see my book being launched and possibly working on my second book. I see myself having at least, because I really want to be a motivational speaker. I've done some speaking engagements before, but I see myself at least speaking on 3 stages in the next 5 years, hopefully more, but I would love to be flown out to speak. That would be one of my dreams. And then I see myself opening up. The main goal is for me to open up my own retreat center with my partner out here in the jungle, in Tulum, like near Tulum. So we are working on that right now as far as a project to create our own retreat center so we can host retreats there. And I don't want to just host retreats. I want people to be able to come there if they need to rent a room for a week or 2 weeks or a month or two, if they just really need a space where they can just quiet their minds, get into their creations, really dive into themselves. So that would be a really great place for me to be in 5 years. Living in the jungle, having my own space that I created with my imagination and my partner's imagination. And yeah, super sustainable.
Sounds like, what do they call it? Super, or like off the grid, simplistic, and
Yes.
minimalist. I like that.
Simplistic but bougie. I'm like a weirdo because I'm like bougie, but I'm also very simple.
Bougistic, simplistic. I love
Bougistic.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. No, that's dope. That's dope. That's the name of the yacht. I have 2 questions, kind of going back a little bit. Then Morgan will wrap up. 2 questions though. I don't know if we covered these. How would someone know if they needed a therapist / counselor versus hiring you, like a life coach, for their issues and challenges? You kind of touched on it, but I kind of want to know, like, clearly, how would somebody know that within themselves, what it is they need exactly?
Yes. So I think that if they haven't gone to a therapist before, or done their own self-healing, like reading, self-help books, or like researching, or like going to retreats, or like anything, like putting themselves in a space of healing before coming to me, I think that they should go to a therapist first, because I think it's really important for someone to be self-aware, and without therapy, or like having a class, or like someone to be able to like hold that space, or like I said, maybe they started diving into spirituality themselves, you know what I mean, started meditating, or like doing yoga, or like doing something like that. I really recommend that they go to a therapist first, because I really, really need that self-awareness aspect to be in there. Because like I said, the whole responsibility thing is going to be huge for the results. And also, if they don't have clear goals, like I said, even if their goal is to like make goals in their life, I can work with them, right? But if they don't have clear goals, and they just kind of feel very lost, and like they really need to kind of like sort out through their traumas, like with somebody, just by letting it out, not really like needing tools or needing to change anything right away, I suggest therapy usually.
All right. And why would it be beneficial to see a life coach instead of a therapist?
I think like once you've gotten past of like being in your feels, this is why I said victim mode is very, very like necessary, because you need to feel your feels. So like if you're at a point where like you have felt your feels, and like you've done all that, I think it's really powerful to be able to hire a coach, because like then you're not just staying in your feelings and the loops and patterns, but like you're like, okay, I do want change. So I think like that's really when you should like consider getting a coach, is if you like have tried everything, or like you've tried some things, but like now you really want someone to hold you accountable to change, you know?
Fair enough. Of
Yeah.
changing and moving towards the future. We kind of went over it really quickly, but I do.
Yeah.
It's the first time anybody ever brought the word up in here, besides the wet word. But this is the other word. You brought up the word chakras. Could you explain in the easiest layman terms what are chakras to people? And you talked about the throat chakra. So, like, what are the different chakras, and kind of what do they do from, I guess, a yoga perspective, and et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So chakras are basically energy centers in the body. I guess the term was coined um from Ayurveda, which is a 5,000-year old practice, right? Ayurveda and yoga are sister sciences. So basically, understanding not just the physical body, but the emotional body, the mental body, the energetic body, right? Like all these other things that maybe we don't see, but they're still very real in this multidimensional human experience. So, chakras are energy centers in the body, and there's multiple parts in other parts of the world. Like even here, the indigenous people have their own name for the energy centers. So there's over hundreds of them, but there are 7 main ones. So the concept is that there's 7 main chakras, starting from the crown of your head to the root of your spine. And the spine is very important, but I'll get into that probably if you just follow my content more. But Joe Dispenza shares a lot of really good stuff about the spine. But you know, the spine is like this giant thing that goes through the entire like body, essentially the upper part of the body. And there's 7 energy points. So there's a crown chakra, there's a third eye chakra, there's a throat chakra, there's a heart chakra, there's a solar plexus, which is at your navel, there's a sacral chakra, which is at where your sexual organs are, and then there's a root chakra at the base of your spine. Each energy center represents a part of the human experience that is needed. So I mentioned duality a little bit about how we have our physical reality, but that the things that we can see, but also we have this other reality, right? We can call it the spiritual reality, the energy reality, the emotions, right? Our thoughts. These are things that are real, but we can't see them, right? So as you go down in your chakra system, the more you're getting down into the material world. So the crown chakra, I'll start there, is the part of us that is the energy center of feeling connected to everything. So feeling that oneness with everything, right? Like the same energy that's flowing through me is flowing through you and you and you and through the trees and all of life, right? And all the planets and all the stars, right? The same energy. It's going off of that concept. When that chakra is blocked, is usually when we tend to feel depression, because depression is when you feel very lost. You don't feel connected to anything. You don't feel like you have purpose. So, like, if a client came to me, they're saying they feel depressed, or like they don't feel connected, they feel really separate from people, or separate from reality, separate from everything, right? I go into this area. So the narrative work, right? There's narratives even around here, right? So I'm connected. I feel connected. I know I'm one with everything, is usually the narratives that you want to have. But if you're having the opposite narratives, we'll start doing that work around that chakra. And there's other ways you can unblock chakras through meditation. I do guided meditations for chakra release. So that really helps. Yoga as well, yoga poses. So the throat chakra that I was
Are there
mentioning
breathing
earlier.
techniques?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry to cut you.
Breathing
Are there breathing
techniques.
techniques? Okay. Just want to know if you
Breathing
utilize that.
techniques. Yep. So for the solar plexus, which is our identity center. So as I was saying, the more you go down, the more physical the things get. So your crown chakra is feeling connected to everything, the oneness with everything, right? Very unseen energy, but it's real, right? And then we have like our third eye, which is like your intuition. It's like your inner knowing. It's like knowing that you're going to wake up tomorrow, right? You don't really have proof of that, right? But you just kind of know, right? And so it's also the intuition of like when you're tapping into that muscle of like, I know that this person, like, I trust this person is good to me. I don't trust that person, but I trust this person. So whenever that muscle of ours is off, I usually go into the third eye chakra. So our throat chakra is going to be our voice. So as you can tell, now we're getting a little bit more into the physical, because the voice and our words and our communication is the first layer of bringing something that's unseen into the scene, right? We can see it when we do writing, and we can hear it through vibrations when we speak. So it's bringing it close to the physical realm. So this part is really important. It's our communication center, right? So usually a trait of this being blocked is that when people can't clearly communicate. So mumbling, when they mumble their words, when they choke, when they have to talk about something vulnerable, how they feel, when they choke, when they have to set a boundary or share, hey, I don't really like that, without
Or
guilt
stuttering.
or stuttering, right? So that's usually something I look for whenever the throat chakra is blocked, because we should be able to speak, hey, that's not something I'm comfortable with, without any guilt or any stories around it that say that I'm not allowed to share that. So now we're getting more into, as you can see, more personal, right? Then we have the heart chakra, which is how we give and receive love, right? So this kind of is physical too, right? Giving a hug. Our arms are actually the extensions of our heart, right? So that's your heart chakra, giving and receiving. This can be unbalanced whenever you feel like you're giving too much and not receiving enough. Love bombing, right? All these things. So different narratives can be in there. Then we have the solar plexus. So this is like your identity. And so this is like it's also associated with an element. So this is associated with the element of fire. So it's your identity. This is at your core. So you can do core exercises for this. These are going to be your balancing poses in yoga. So if you struggle with balancing, usually your solar plexus is off, which is your identity in the physical world. So your ego. Ego's not a bad thing, right? Ego is just the part of us that's accepted identities from our subconscious. But a healthy ego is when we've chosen our identity, right? So that's a really powerful solar plexus, like where you can just see somebody owning who they are unapologetically. This is who I am. This is my story. This is my name. This is my age. This is what I do. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. Just sharing who you are, right? Very different from the crown chakra energy, which is saying, I am you and you are me, which is also very true. But then let's bring it down to the ground. But who are you here in this duality world where, yes, we're all connected. I am you and you are me. The same thing looking outside of me, same thing looking outside of you, and an animal and a bird and a bee, right? Spirit, energy, but also who are you though here? And let's go ahead and figure that out, right? So this is like really important, you know, for grounding. Then you get into your sacral chakra, which is right where your sexual organs are. This is going to be your needs as a human being, as an animal. So this is going to be your sexual needs, your pleasures, food, right? Like food, your desires, right? Your manifestation, saying, I do want to go on a yacht. And what, right? Being able to own that, being able to say that. I do want to be with this person, right? Even though it's someone that, you know, so and so doesn't approve of or society doesn't approve of, right? I do want to love this person. So having a strong voice in that. I work with a lot of women. The number one blockage of the sacral chakra is guilt and shame. The energies of guilt and shame can be very heavy in this area, and it's our creation center, the sacral chakra. So guilt and shame can block our creations, right? Because then we're having a story of guilt around, this is what I desire on this physical realm, and I do have this part of me as a human being that wants pleasure. So I think a lot of people get caught up in the higher chakras when they're in this spiritual world, but they forget to be grounded, that you're allowed to have desires, right? Just don't be a slave to your desires. You can't get too caught up in the lower chakras, and you can't get too caught up in the higher chakras, because the lower chakras are going to all be your ego. The higher chakras are going to be your spirit. So balance, equanimity, right? Then we have your root chakra at the base of your spine. These are your basic survival necessities. So we're not going into pleasure anymore. We're going into food, shelter, money, support financially, roof over your head. So if these are things you struggle with, most likely you have a root chakra imbalance, right? So we got to go in there and heal some of that energy and break some of that energy up. And usually what blocks that energy is feeling unsafe. So a lot of people that grew up feeling very unsafe in their home environment, in their basic survival, they're going to have a lot of blockages around the root chakra. There's a lot that I could get into with chakras, but I hope that explains it. So these are all energy centers that describe the multidimensionalness of a human being and a human experience.
You know, and you might have touched on it, and you said a whole lot, but like, and I'm sorry if I missed it if you said it. Do you have to? Are you so say people have blockages on more than one? Are there ones you start with first, or like is there a certain method you have to go in an order? There you go, an order that you would go in to unblock those.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I recommend everybody watches this one anime. It's actually from Avatar. And if you type it in on YouTube, it'll say, you just type in chakras avatar and it'll show this little cartoon, right? And it kind of shows how they're all connected, and it's like different pools of water, and when there's muck stuck in one of them, the water can't flow into the other ones, right? So it's a very beautiful cartoon. I highly recommend it for anybody to just understand chakras in general. But yes, I would say they're all connected. So there is kind of an order. So if a sacral chakra is blocked, what's in between? So the sacral and the throat are highly connected because guilt and shame actually block both of those. But what's in the middle of both of those is the heart. So I would start to cleanse out those three all together, right? But at the same time, there's not necessarily an order. They're all connected. So I usually go within one and then see if there's, anything I can release there through energy work, through breath work, and I teach people how to do their own energy work, right? So you can feel your own energy centers if you tune into them. And so it's just about knowing which ones are blocked. And you don't necessarily have to have an order, but you do have to know that they're all connected. So after unblocking one, really, really seeing how your energy is flowing a lot better with the other ones, and you're feeling very present and grounded and here, right? And connected and loved and all those things. But I would mainly go into the one that you're struggling with the most and start there.
Aren't there people that like kind of read them on people? Like, I don't know if they're shamans, yogas, but there are people that read and kind of know which one is blocked for you, right? Like kind of knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. So even without somebody talking, right? Like I have my Reiki certification, but anybody can do this, right? You're just getting really, really hyper tuned into the energy world. And we all have this ability. We all have this ability. So you can meditate, you just get really into the subtleness of things. And I can put my hand over a chakra, right? And like I said, anybody could do this, but you just have to get into this space and you can put your hand over a chakra and really start to feel if there's a lot of heat coming out of it, right? If it's overactive, if there's something there, or if it feels very cool and balanced, then it's balanced. There's also tools. So I don't have it with me right now, it's in my room, but there's this thing called a pendulum. And you can put a pendulum over a chakra and it'll start to essentially spin out of control, or it'll be still. And you'll actually know if you have a blockage if it's still and if it's not spinning. So there's a lot of ways to get into our subtle body and energetic body to be able to also tell on an energetic level, even without saying what somebody's struggling with, what's going on and where there's a blockage.
I was gonna say it's really weird that you brought up Avatar, because I was literally just watching Avatar before I came on here tonight. So that's just crazy. Like that connection already, like that, like it's almost a coincidence that I was watching that tonight. But
Yeah.
Just to get us going here, what legacy would you like to leave behind when all this is said and done?
I really just want people to know how powerful they are and be able to create their lives through this knowledge by going within and like doing the inner work to see their outer life change. So like I said, even if one person that I've worked with, and now I have multiple people that have gotten these results. So I think like the legacy would be for each one to reach one and teach one, because I am only one person and this isn't even my knowledge, right? This knowledge is all just bits and pieces of my journey, but all this knowledge is thousands of years old. So I can really see in the future how this knowledge, even after I'm no longer on this planet, can change the world. So I really would love my legacy to be that my voice and my unique way of teaching this ancient knowledge gets out there to at least one person, and then them be able to teach somebody else, and then that person to teach somebody else, and then that person to teach somebody else. And then from there, the collective consciousness can shift and change. And of course, I want to leave behind physical legacies as well, like my retreat center and my books, and things like that, just for that same purpose of each one, reach one and teach one.
That's great. And then the name of the show is Powaful Impact. So who are the three most important people that have had the greatest or most significant impact on your life, either personally, professionally, or just in general and miscellaneously?
One would be my father, my dad. My dad has been my biggest trigger, and we have to look into who are our biggest triggers, who triggers us the most in life, because I would not be here if I didn't have something to heal. And I would not be here if he didn't trigger me, if he didn't push me, because I feel like I wouldn't have had a reason to ask, who am I really, or why am I here, if it wasn't for my experience with my dad as my dad, in this life. So I really, really give it all to my dad, my pops. Another person that I would say that significantly, I mean, there's so many, but another person that significantly impacted my life would be my ex, the one who was physically abusive. I know these aren't the typical answers you would think, but I'm very grateful for his presence in my life, because like I said, he mirrored to me what I already had within myself. And I would not have been able to know that I thought of myself in that way and been able to do this work and now be able to help, eventually thousands of women and men, that didn't understand this concept of like their reality and their partners being a mirror of their own inner beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say his experience in my life and that experience in my life, it was huge. And then lastly, I would say my coach Steph, because I've always wanted to help people. Ever since I came into this world, I always wanted to help people. I got bullied a lot when I was younger, and I've always wanted to help people because I always knew what that felt like to be bullied. And I never knew how I was going to do it. I never knew when I would do it. I never knew that I would actually have the balls to do it. And she saw something in me and told me, yes, of course I can do it. And that was the only person that didn't make me feel like I was crazy, because my whole life I've always just been called crazy because I've just been like so genuinely wanting to help people. And everybody just thought like, oh, you wouldn't be able to do that. And my end goal, not my end goal, but one of my huge goals is to be a talk show host. I want to have a talk show where I interview people in this in this industry, or just like people with very unique stories, life-changing transformational stories. And I feel like, she was the first person to tell me, yes, you can. And she really helped me develop my voice to be able to share my story vulnerably. And I know I would not be here without her. So I really, really love her as well.
And then we've talked about, you've mentioned stuff throughout the interview here, but do you want to shout out any people and then go ahead and promote your stuff again when stuff's going down, the books, all that stuff?
Yeah, sure. Just shout out to all my clients. I feel like I love them so much, and I've developed such a sisterhood and brotherhood with all of them. So shout out to them. Shout out to my partner, Raphael, because without him, I wouldn't be able to like further my dream. Like, he was definitely a manifestation in my life, because now my retreat ideas from like 6 years ago are now coming into fruition. So my dreams are really coming true through him. So I really thank him as my partner, and I love him so much. And yes, so right now my main offering is this couples retreat in November, from the 10th to the 14th. So if anybody's interested in deepening their relationship within themselves and with their partner, that's what this retreat's going to be all about. If you're curious about plant medicine, we are going to do a mushroom ceremony. It's going to be a microdose, in a ceremony fashion, right? In a ceremonia. And also, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to do salsa classes. We're going to do like tours. We're going to have a lot of fun. So it's going to be really, really life-changing. All my retreats are super life-changing and transformative. So if anybody's interested in that, just reach out to me. If you're interested in coaching with me one-on-one, I am going to be taking 3 clients next month. So I'm taking consultations now for those spots. And in order to do that, you can reach out to me on Instagram. There's a link in my bio. So my name is Metaphysical_Goddess. Metaphysical_Goddess. So you can reach out to me there. That's the best way to contact me. And then I'm hoping for my book to be launched in January. So if you follow me on Instagram, you can get all those updates. As Neville shared, I am now starting to make little shorts or little reels. So everything that you heard today, I always love to share as much content as I can on my page as well. So shoot me a follow and reach out to me directly too. If you heard me on this podcast, I'd love to just connect with you. And yeah, that's kind of like the best way to reach out to me, I would say, is Instagram.
I was going to ask that next, but you covered it already.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for coming on. Like, I knew this was going to be like an experience in itself, and be able to learn so much from you. It's amazing. And I think you're so articulate and such a great speaker that I hope everything that you're wanting to come true comes true for you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. I had such a great time. This was such a dope interview. It's like literally been my favorite so far. So thank you guys so much for having me on. I feel super honored, and just like for the opportunity. And I'm glad that what I was saying was making sense, and that you were picking up on it, because that means a lot to me as well.
So for anyone watching, we will put all of her information in the description, so you can find all that there. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, like the video. Go follow Metaphysical on Goddess on her social, so you can get all that information, all the content that she's posting. Nev, was there anything else?
She's gone out there, made a powerful impact. We've gone out there, made a powerful impact. Now you go out there and make a powerful impact. Boom!
Oh, mic drop.
All right. Thanks so much.
Boom.
Thank you so much. Peace and love.